Citrus is a Yuri manga series by Saburo Uta that began publishing in November 2012 via the, at the time, monthly magazine Comic Yuri Hime. The mangaka's own experience with the girl she fell in love with in high school inspired the series, saying she was able to put her most important, funniest, and most tragic moments of this first love into the story of Citrus. I can't think of another Yuri series that's been as popular, controversial, and polarizing as Citrus. Other series have managed one or two of those qualifiers, such as NTR, Netsuzo Trap, or Valkyrie Drive Mermaid, but neither series had all three. This isn't about NTR or Valkyrie Drive, but NTR never received better than mixed reviews from critics, in both manga and anime form, and Valkyrie Drive is a series where if you like it, I get it, and if you don't like it, I get it. Citrus stands out because as of this video, its anime adaptation is the most popular girls love anime on the popular anime and manga social networking and cataloging application MyAnimeList. On the same site, it's also the second most popular girls love manga, just behind Bloom Into You. Likewise, on Yuri blog Okazu, site founder and esteemed Yuri critic Erica Friedman reviewed the anime and gave it a 1 out of 10. The next day, on the same website, fellow genre critic Nikki Bauman, known by the online handle Holy Mother of Yuri, wrote a guest review of the anime and gave it an 8 out of 10. There are other overwhelmingly positive and negative reviews, such as when Anime News Network gave the anime a decent score of B-, and the first volume of the manga a solid score of B. Or when video essayist Zuria criticized the anime heavily in their video Citrus, the most disappointing Yuri anime in a long time. But I feel like the dichotomy on Okazu, quote, the world's oldest and most comprehensive blog on lesbian-themed Japanese cartoons, comics, and related media, is a microcosm of the series' critical consensus. It's a series that people seem to love or hate. While there are people who are more apathetic as a whole, they seem like the minority. And as someone who has read and watched the series, I see why. It's a series that almost demands a strong reaction. Dare I say it's the Neon Genesis Evangelion of Yuri. Don't take that out of context. What I mean is Citrus is a series I had a lot of thoughts about after watching it for the first time, and even more so upon reading the manga. So like Evangelion, it's a series my friends and acquaintances hate when it's brought up because they know I won't shut up about it for a few hours. Don't look at the length of this video. For those who clicked on this video and have no idea what I'm talking about, Yuri is a genre of Japanese media about intimate relationships between female characters. Basically, it's Japanese lesbian or sapphic entertainment. It's sometimes referred to as girls love or GL for short, and more rarely, and outdatedly, shoujo ai. Yuri means lily in Japanese, and starting in the 1970s, lesbians in Japan were sometimes referred to as being part of the lily tribe. Recently, the genre has exploded in popularity in both Japan and overseas, with an increase in Yuri print media being published and an increase of Yuri anime airing. A few recent examples include Adachin Shimomura, The Executioner and Her Way of Life, and The Magical Revolution of the Reincarnated Princess and the Genius Young Lady. It's a joke about how anime titles get longer with each passing year. Alright. There are, of course, many older examples of Yuri anime, including, but not limited to, Dear Brother from the 90s, Strawberry Panic from the 2000s, and Soccer Trick from the 2010s. So why am I talking about Citrus? First, it helped create the 2010s Yuri boom that continued in the 2020s Yuri explosion, and somehow managed not to get lost in the shuffle. For some, Citrus should have been forgotten as more and better Yuri entered the market, yet it endures. Why is it loved? Why is it hated? Why has it endured? Second, I have a lot of thoughts about it, and my friends have stopped letting me talk about it with them. So I decided to make a frustratingly long video with all my thoughts polished to a mirror shine. Plus now if anyone ever asks me my thoughts on Citrus, I can save myself the time and point to this video. Citrus is one of the most popular Yuri anime and manga there is. While the original manga ended publishing in October 2018, the story continues in the sequel manga Citrus Plus, still publishing as of this video. The manga was popular in Japan and the West, where several volumes of the US release made it onto the New York Times bestseller list for manga. Likewise, it received an anime adaptation in 2018 that covered the first 4 of 10 volumes of the manga, which is still the most popular girls love anime on My Anime List. Now, My Anime List, or MAL, is not a resource but a tool and is restricted to the English-speaking world, so its reach is limited. With that being said, MAL is useful for getting a cursory glance at things in the English-speaking animanga fandom. Okay, so what's Citrus's problem? As of now, I've skirted around what Citrus is about and what its problems are. I've let its reputation do the talking. If you're a person who clicks on video essays on topics you've never heard of because you need something to watch while eating, you're probably wondering why I'm even discussing this Japanese comic about lesbians specifically. Let's restart. Citrus is a Yuri manga about the relationship between stepsisters Mei and Yuzu Aihara. Yeah, I can see the expression on your face. And I can see the people who already knew what Citrus was about putting their heads in their hands. That's Citrus's first strike, being a pseudo, though some would skip the prefix entirely, incest story. Chances are, if you know one thing about Citrus, it's that. And if you know 2 things about Citrus, it's the scene people share around from the anime where one of the characters forcibly and uncomfortably kisses the other. That's strike 2. Hell, that's an out each for some people. I can't blame anyone who thinks that. But let's say you're morbidly curious about where the series went and what I'm gonna say about it. Or you accidentally clicked this video when trying to get a screenshot to ask people on social media how the f someone can make a 4-hour video on Citrus of all things. To put it bluntly, and to title drop, Citrus is complicated. It's not a perfect nor unproblematic work, yet after watching the anime and reading the manga, I can't outright dismiss it either, and that's its most frustrating aspect. If depictions or discussions of incest and non-consensual elements are things you don't wish to or cannot be a part of, that's perfectly fine. I'm not here to defend poor depictions of these topics or downplay them, but they are things I'll have to talk about to get to the heart of the series. Before we can jump right into Citrus, we need to talk about Class S. Class S, or S literature, was a Japanese literary movement that started in the early 20th century. Yoshia Nabuko's 1919 novel Yaneura no ni Shoujo is often regarded as the pioneer of Class S and also Yuri and girls literature, and it established many of the common tropes we use today. The movement happened in conjunction with the relatively new concept of educating girls, primarily from well-off families, in sex-segregated Catholic schools in Japan. These schools encouraged younger students to establish platonic romantic relationships with admired older schoolmates to prevent them from engaging in relationships with young men outside of proper courtship. And in case you're wondering, the S stood for many things, including shoujo, sister, shun, sex, escape, I see what you did there, and among some, S also stood for sappho. Girls' literature of the time, including Class S, presented these relationships as passionate yet platonic bonds of sisterhood. Class S stories started publishing in girls' magazines at the time, which also published letters by young women breathlessly sharing attraction and emotional intimacy between themselves and their admirable older sisters at school. Class S was an offshoot of the broader socio-political S movement formed by Japanese women. The S school of thought was not about lesbians in private schools, as the genre of literature it spawned might lead one to believe, but was a proto-feminist movement. Yuri genre critic and Yuricon founder Erica Friedman notes that women who were part of the S movement ran into many of the same dynamics the American feminist movement of the 1970s encountered. Some women felt that they simply wanted to have their contributions valued, others that only a separatist society could ever be fair to women, while others wanted male privilege or simply the right to have their own gender's privilege. And, just as with the later American feminist movement, the inclusion of sexuality and gender in the mix caused a split between the straight women, who felt that political equality was more important than social liberalism, and women who felt there was no separation between the two. S was not simply about schoolgirl lesbians, but women having enriching inner lives without men and having the freedom to choose their futures. Therefore, calling these Class S relationships lesbian or Yuri, whether in literature or historically, can be misleading. It's similar to how Boston marriages, the cohabitation of 2 female friends independent of financial support from a man in the late 19th to early 20th century, are often called lesbian by us now, but the word lesbian was not used by the people in the relationship even if they were lovers. Class S relationships in literature were often portrayed as non-sexual and purely emotional. As such, lesbian identity, homosexual desire, and sensuality were often downplayed or treated as non-existent. Friedman notes, "I have many times explained in conversation that in Japan, taking a female lover and, quote, being gay are almost entirely unrelated things. To identify as gay, lesbian, or any sexual minority in Japan is to take a political stance. Much as the same was true for the members of the Mattachine Society or Daughters of Bilitis in America in the 1950s. Saying I am gay in an apparently homogenous society is to label oneself as other and minority. This is, in any society, a political act." Shirohei no Futari by Yamagishi Ryoko from 1971 is considered by most Yuri critics and historians to be the first Yuri manga, and it is dripping with Class S tropes. Upper-class single-sex school? Check. Protagonists forced to room together? Check. Relationship that isn't allowed to progress past graduation? Check. Though some S stories don't follow that, it was still common to the genre. And Shirohei no Futari goes full American 1950s lesbian pulp and ends with death because two girls with genuine attraction to each other can't be allowed to get away unscathed, motherfucker. Shirohei no Futari didn't just introduce S-tropes to manga, it invented some new ones that would be staples of proto and early Yuri. Death or marriage was a big one it introduced, but it also created the prototypical Yuri couple, an emotionally unbalanced dark-haired beauty known as the Yamato Nadeshiko, and a cheerful blonde or light brown-haired girl dubbed the Crimson Rose and Candy Girl couple. We'll go back to that. Likewise, having the dark-haired lead Simone be mentally unstable helped create, or solidify, I guess, the emotionally unstable lesbian trope, which we can all thank Freud for. Afterward, through the 80s, 90s, and 2000s, Yuri creators expanded tropes created for girls' literature, Class S, and Proto-Yuri, and approached the core concept with both affection and contempt born of familiarity with the setting and selective nostalgia for this idealized past. By the start of the 2010s, girls in love at a private school had become a done-and-dusted Yuri trope in no small part due to the increased volume of Yuri being produced by more and more creatives. And Class S wasn't simply a thing from the early 1900s. It saw a revival in the 90s thanks to the light novel series Maria Sama ga Miteru, known in the West as Maria Watches Over Us due to its anime adaptation. And this would go on to influence a whole slew of neo-Class S narratives such as Destiny of the Shrine Maiden, Strawberry Panic, and Sweet Blue Flowers. Even 70 plus years later, Class S continues to impact the Yuri genre. Maria Watches Over Us and its imitators focused on the big sister-little sister relationship trope that was so deeply embedded in Yuri and so well known to Japanese fans. Unfortunately for most English-speaking fans, many early sources of girls' literature, Class S and Proto-Yuri remain officially untranslated. Class S has not only had a huge influence on Yuri, but the Japanese perception of lesbians, lesbian relationships, and lesbian love. So, while at the time Class S relationships were particularly regarded as not a genuine expression of same-sex attraction, were seen as normal, even spiritual, as long as said relationships remained confined to adolescence, this attitude would later inform contemporary perspectives on lesbianism in Japan, a tolerance towards non-sexual intimacy between girls, and the widespread belief that female homosexuality is, quote, a phase. Citrus is the story of Yuzu, a geru inexperienced in love. Her life is turned upside down, however, when her mom remarries, causing her to have to transfer to the prestigious yet conservative all-girls school Aihara Academy. Before classes even start, she is disciplined by the student council for not complying with the dress code, and has a standoff with the professional and uptight student council president Mei over using her phone on school grounds. Later, Yuzu manages to befriend fellow outcast Harumin, who is the best character in the whole goddamn series. Also, Yuzu spots a teacher making out with a student, and she realizes that student is Mei before she panics and runs away, thinking they've spotted her. After coming home from her awful first day, Yuzu's mom surprises her with the fact that Yuzu has a new stepsister who is, shock of all shocks, Mei, the student council president. Yuzu tries to socialize with Mei as a peace offering of sorts, and when Mei brushes her off, Yuzu confronts Mei about Mei making out with the teacher, and in response, Mei forcefully kisses Yuzu before storming off, implying that the kiss Mei received from the teacher wasn't consensual. From here, Yuzu tries to fill the role of being a good big stepsister to Mei by getting the teacher fired for having inappropriate relations with a student, helping her reconcile with her childhood friend Himiko, and reconnecting her with her estranged father. However, throughout this, Yuzu realizes her feeling for Mei isn't sisterly affection but romantic love, compounded further when Yuzu's childhood friend Matsuri reemerges to rival Mei for Yuzu's affection. It comes to a head when Yuzu is forced to express her feelings to Mei during the state-mandated school trip arc. The aftermath has the two finally start dating in secret, anxious about the ridicule they'll face not just for being family by marriage dating, but also for being gay in a homogenous society as rigid in conformity as Japan. Interestingly for a Yuri series, a majority of the manga's run is about Mei and Yuzu dating. It didn't stop with them getting together and ending with a where are they now epilogue, or is it simply the last act of the series? Yet they start dating far enough in the story that it doesn't feel like it's only about them dating. Often, and especially at the time Citrus's publishing, Yuri romances ended with the main couple finally getting together, where they were already dating at the start of the series. There are exceptions, but the most popular and influential Yuri manga at the time, such as Sweet Blue Flowers, Girlfriends, Whispered Words, and Strawberry Panic did that. Kase-san is the main couple dating early enough that I consider it a from-the-go romance, and even the later published Bloom Into You followed the traditional Yuri structure when it came to its romance, even if we got more sensual scenes than most throughout the series. One of the few contemporaries I can think of that did this was Adachi Shimomura, which will be half pre-relationship and half in relationship when the series concludes with Book 12. From here, Mei and Yuzu deal with managing the tightrope of acknowledging their relationship and feelings while not being noticed by their friends, family, and society, with an exception of a select few confidants. They run against each other for student council president over the issue of hair dye, go on their awkward first dates, witness homophobia firsthand, attend summer school, try to find private moments over summer vacation, and deal with the threat of an arranged marriage. In all honesty, what happens after Mei and Yuzu start dating is when the series grows the beard. Much of the weaknesses and weirdness of the early chapters are peeled away with each successive volume until chapter 17, when it starts to feel like the story Sabaruta had in mind with Citrus comes to fruition. Even when rereading the series for this video, I noticed how much of a jump in quality going from volume 4 to 5 was. The early chapters aren't awful, and they're necessary for understanding the rest of the series, but you can tell Sabaru Uta was still figuring a lot of things out. As such, the weakest part, and ironically the most famous part of the series due to the anime adaptation, is the first 4 volumes. Oh yeah, and the reason it's called Citrus is because Yuzu is also the name of a citrus, and it isn't a Yuri unless it has a title that's a reference to plants in some way. Bloom Into You, Goodbye My Rose Garden, Hana and Hina After School, Hanjuku Joshi, A Kiss for the Petals, Kisses, Sighs, and Cherry Blossom Pink, Revolution Girl Utena, The Rose of Versailles, Sakura Trick, Strawberry Fields Once Again, Strawberry Panic, Strawberry Shake Sweet, Sweet Blue Flowers, A White Rose in Bloom, and that's not including all the series with Yuri in the title. Incest is going to be a big part of the discussion about Citrus, so I can't wait till the end of the video to talk about it. Yet I can't bring up everything I want to say about incest and Citrus at the beginning of this video because it requires elements I won't get into until much later. So, consider this section a general overview and introduction to how we'll be looking at incest in Citrus. I want to say while I respect people's decisions to not engage with stories that feature incest, you don't have to consume things you don't want to. I'm not going to crucify any work of art for exploring any topic, taboo, or otherwise. To quote Plato, considered in itself, no action is either good or bad, honorable or shameful. How it comes out depends entirely on how it is performed. And I don't think Citrus is portraying incest to be purely fetishistic as people often claim. Instead, the stepsister relationship is a way to evoke and comment on Class S tropes. If the Class S crash course in Citrus summary didn't tip you off, Citrus utilizes and modernizes elements of Class S literature and Proto-Yuri into contemporary Japan. Ihara Academy is very much the prestigious all-girls school of the past without the Catholic pretense. The fact that Mei and Yuzu share a room at home is a take on how many Class S and Proto-Yuri stories have the main couple start as secluded roommates. Mei and Yuzu themselves are a contemporary adaptation of Shirohei no Futari's iconic couple of the mentally unstable Yamato Nadeshiko and the cheerful blonde-haired girl. In the arranged marriage arc near the end of the manga is a trope present in Class S and Proto-Yuri stories. Mei and Yuzu being stepsisters are part of this reframing of Class S tropes, a contemporary adaptation of these sister-like relationships between girls in Class S. Second, I found while researching for this video that while there are tons of Yuri about sisters, half-sisters, cousins, and other brother-related relationships, Citrus is uniquely between stepsisters. Stepfamily Yuri has been much harder to find compared to its blood-related counterpart. The closest ones I can find are the big stepsis who wants to be a big stepsister versus the little stepsis who wants to be Yuri, which is what it says on the tin and only started publishing last year, and If I Could Reach You, which is about a girl in love with her sister-in-law, but including that feels like I'm forcing a similarity. The most similar I found is the previously mentioned The Magical Revolution of the Reincarnated Princess in The Genius Young Lady, where the two leads become adopted sisters some ways and due to royal succession mumbo jumbo. It's honestly super complicated and one of the last things people mentioned about the series. Any other examples were obscure one-shots and H-doujinshis. The trope isn't normally this hard to find in the anime-manga sphere. Series such as Uramaga Sensei, Domestic Girlfriend, and Kiss Sis are pretty well known in the anime-manga community. And hearing the phrase Kiss Sis probably gave you Vietnam flashbacks if you went to a high school anime club in the early to mid-2010s. If Citrus simply wanted to be another incest Yuri, there wasn't anything stopping it. The stepsister relationship actually makes Citrus feel like it's moving away from incestuous themes, whereas in a lot of Western media, stepfamily relationships make it feel like it's trying to rub up against incest without crossing that line. Given how much rarer stepfamily relationships are in the genre compared to blood-related ones, it paints a blurrier picture of intent with Mei and Yuzu's relationship. Finally, just because something depicts incest doesn't mean a work is bad. Incest is a valid subject like any other. Several Yuri series have themes of incest, for example, Revolution Girl Utena and Sweet Blue Flowers. Sweet Blue Flower's main character, Fumi, has her sexual awakening with her older female cousin. Her cousin, however, then gets engaged to a man and abandons Fumi. While an uncomfortable situation, it's used to illustrate Fumi's alienation from her sexuality. Since her sexual awakening and thus her sexual identity is so intertwined with her cousin, it provides a reason to why Fumi feels so alone. She can't talk about it to her family because it all connects back to her cousin, yet Fumi cannot escape her loneliness and isolation for the same reason. Her cousin is close to Fumi's parents, she visits often and has a wedding soon. Fumi cannot forget nor talk about her sexuality and identity. It's an uncomfortable situation on purpose. The anime adaptation uses this as a through line. Fumi and her girlfriend later ex Yasuko are in stasis, using each other to get over previous heartbreaks. Only when both decide to move on and forgive themselves are they able to change as people. Fumi's change by the end is understanding she liked girls before her cousin, and thus doesn't need to feel shame for her sexuality and thus her identity anymore. She can finally love again, freely, without shame. Utena uses incest as an example of patriarchal violence, and as a way to demonstrate the blurring of roles, that between family and lovers, or even between different roles within family, parents, sibling, child, etc. Utena, like any work of director Kuniko Ikuhara, is a long conversation in its own right. So for the sake of this dive into incest in Yuri, let's just simplify Utena's thoughts on incest as incest is used as an extension of patriarchal violence. I think Citrus is doing interesting things with its depiction of incest, so I can't accept that Citrus is a stepsister narrative to be purely fetishistic. I have more to say about how Citrus uses incest and its narrative later on in the video when we discuss themes, and even later we will discuss whether or not Citrus successfully justifies its premise. So let's move on to the other elephant in the room: consent. I will try my best to discuss the non-consensual elements in Citrus with as much tact and care as possible, with the understanding that some will flat out disagree with any critique I give. I understand that. Art is neither created nor experienced in a vacuum, so my interpretations, criticisms, and defense of certain elements may not apply to everyone. There are two main scenes people talk about when discussing consent in Citrus, especially in context of the anime. One is this very weird and sensual, which perhaps isn't the right word, I'm sorry, scene where Mei confiscates Yuzu's phone. We'll be discussing that one later actually, because it's an anime exclusive scene and is part of a bigger discussion about the anime adaptation itself. The second is the scene where Mei forcibly kisses Yuzu at the end of episode 1 or chapter 1. While there are some changes in the adaptation, the context and content of the scene are the same, and it's something we need to discuss. After learning that Mei and she will be stepsisters, Yuzu attempts a peace offering over what happened earlier that day. But when Mei ignores her, Yuzu tries to get a reaction by asking Mei about their teacher Amamiya-sensei, since Yuzu had seen the two kissing earlier that day. Yuzu continues to egg Mei on until Mei forcibly kisses Yuzu, saying,
"It felt like that. Magical enough for you?"
In response to Yuzu asking how kissing Amamiya-sensei was. Mei storms off with a sad look in her eyes, and Yuzu is left speechless on the floor. Mei's forced kissing of Yuzu is supposed to show Yuzu how it felt to be kissed by Amamiya-sensei. Amamiya-sensei is Mei's fiancé and not of her own will. In the same way Mei forced herself onto Yuzu, Amamiya-sensei, a literal adult, forced himself onto Mei, a literal child. While Mei has a very stoic face, she doesn't show any signs of enjoying kissing Yuzu, and her face upon leaving is full of sadness and frustration. Mei is acting out, not in a healthy way mind you, but when you're a 16-year-old girl who is expected to run a prestigious academy in the place of your father whom you haven't seen in years, and have had older men feel entitled to your body because your grandfather has arranged for them to be your husband ever since you were a literal f***ing child, yeah, you're gonna act a little f***ed up. The point of that scene is that it's supposed to be uncomfortable. It's not sexy, it's not sensual, it's not romantic. It's a survivor of abuse expressing herself in the only way she knows how, which unfortunately isn't a healthy way. This section is shorter than the previous one because this topic broadens into my next point, and to do that we need to go on to discuss the themes of Citrus. So why bother discussing a series with this much baggage? Because beneath its price of entry and abrasive exterior, I think there's things of value to extract from Citrus. We'll talk about the serious issues with Citrus and my own personal problems with it later, but I think there's something valuable here, especially in its two most obvious appeals, its themes and characters. And while I don't think this is necessary to say, I will say I am coming to Citrus from the perspective of a queer trans woman. So no telling me my opinion isn't valid because I'm not the right demographic to think critically about a piece of media. I also have a degree in literature and writing, but that seems less important, I guess. And this brings us back to Mei forcefully kissing Yuzu. Citrus is discussed for containing depictions of non-consensual elements. During the first chapter of the manga, which was adapted into the first episode of the anime, we see two non-consensual acts, not including the anime's weird adaptation of the phone scene. While most remember the forced kiss between Mei and Yuzu at the end of the chapter, many forget the kiss is Mei reenacting Amamiya-sensei kissing her earlier in the chapter. While some deem this scene and others like it in the series to be exploitative and for their own sake, I'd argue these scenes are used to handle themes of abuse, grief, and trauma. Using hindsight, the first chapter is a deliberate depiction of cycles of abuse, from an abuser to an abused who goes on to abuse another. As Rebecca Silverman notes in a review of the first volume for Anime News Network, Yuzu realizes that Mei's facial expression in both cases did not denote passion, but rather emotional discomfort, making the kiss she forced on Yuzu an act of retaliation for discussing an uncomfortable event, rather than something born of attraction. It is also impossible to realize this when looking at the two scenes individually. Saburo Uta's use of reader hindsight is both unusual and very well done, and perhaps should also make us question the usual blushing/crying face we see on the protagonist's faces during kissing or sex scenes. But as the series goes on, even this is an oversimplification, as Citrus is not a series about abuse, but healing. Friedman, in her landmark book By Your Side, First 100 Years of Yuri Anime and Manga, correctly characterizes Mei's behavior as consistent with a survivor of sexual abuse, but in my opinion misreads the reason. They say we were told it's because her father neglected her, comparing Mei to Yaya from Strawberry Panic. Yaya is a character said to have been neglected by her father as both a stand-in for abuse, as her behavior maps to a sexually abused child, and also directly stated to be the cause of her lesbianism. Friedman reiterates that Mei's behavior, like Yaya's, is much more consistent with a survivor of sexual abuse, but once again, we are told it's because her father neglected her. While it's true Mei's father was absent, I'd argue the text itself isn't so reductive. The story and Mei herself do place a lot of emphasis on Mei's father being away, but the first thing that clues us in that something is wrong is when Mei forcibly kisses Yuzu to make Yuzu understand what it was like to be kissed by Amamiya-sensei. I'll discuss more of this unevenness and blame later, but it's clear there on the page that Mei's trauma is not simply because her dad isn't around, but also because Mei was forced into an inappropriate and abusive relationship she had no power to escape from. Mei has suffered more than just from the neglect of her father in the text. For example, when Himiko tried to get physical with Mei despite Mei's protests, Mei comes home triggered by the event despite successfully preventing it from escalating. While Friedman and I both agree that Mei is a sexual abuse survivor, my reading of Citrus is that the series acknowledges this too, and while it isn't spoken as overtly between characters as the absence of Mei's father, it is still there as an intended story detail. To Friedman's credit, the section this is from is titled A Survey of Lesbianism and Mental Instability in Yuri, where she looked at the pattern in Yuri media between 1938 and 2012 of having mentally unstable lesbians, usually at the fault of the father. This is because Sigmund Freud's writings on the pathology of homosexuality strongly affected Japanese theories of psychiatry. He wrote that female homosexuality was a pathological manifestation of masculinity. which he discussed in detail in a paper, The Psychogenesis of a Case of Homosexuality in a Woman, and was always the fault of the father. So unfortunately, even if I don't think the neglect of her father is the full picture, May still fits within this pattern. I'd still argue, however, that Citrus goes the extra mile by contextualizing May's instability with sexual abuse within the narrative and makes the story about her healing from it. And just because an aspect is problematic doesn't mean it's soiled with original sin. We can still enjoy and even praise stuff we've also critiqued. Things are not uniform. We can praise a painting's use of red while criticizing its use of blue. For the record, I want to stress that I have nothing but praise for Friedman and their work, as it has allowed me to understand and appreciate Yuri better. And if it wasn't for her writing, and especially her book, By Your Side, I wouldn't be doing what I'm doing right now. I think Friedman's one of the most important Yuri writers and critics in the English language, even if we disagree on whether or not we like a series. I just wanted to get that out there because on the internet, people, usually a third party, interpret any critique or disagreement as personal attack. We good? Okay, cool. An uncomfortable truth is that a lot of abusers were abused themselves, whether it be physically, emotionally, or sexually. Not all, but it's not uncommon. The most famous betrayal of this is in Paula Vogel's feminist play, How I Learned to Drive, where the main character, a woman nicknamed Little Bit, recounts her sexually abusive relationship with her Uncle Peck during her adolescence. While a majority of the play takes place when Little Bit is underage, a flash forward shows her having a one-night stand with a high school student when she is 27 years old. And after the second act climax and a gentle denouement, before the post-play discussion, I lay on my back in the dark and I thought of you, Uncle Peck. Oh, this is the allure, being older, being the first, being the translator, the teacher, the epicure, the already jaded. This is how the giver gets taken. Little Bit also heavily implies that Uncle Peck may have been molested himself too when he was young. Now that I'm old enough, there are some questions I would have liked to ask him. Who did it to you, Uncle Peck? How old were you? Were you 11? May's arc mirrors this story in that it too is about portraying the cycle of abuse. However, whereas How I Learned to Drive tries to portray the origins of the cycle, May's arc is about trying to break it. May's toxic habits towards Yuzu are not present throughout the majority of the series. As early as Volume 3/Chapter 9, or Episode 7 of the anime, May has mostly lost her edge, trying not to be physical with Yuzu. While part of it is because it's hinted that she's fallen for Yuzu at some point, I also think it's because Yuzu has stood up for herself. When May's father returns, causing May to have her mental breakdown,
I had no choice. Nobody else was around to take care of the academy. And now that my father doesn't need my help, who's going to give my life any purpose?
May uses Yuzu's affection for her as a coping mechanism and tries to seduce her.
Tell me honestly, Yuzu, you'll be the one who needs me, won't you? You want to do things with me, right? Please say yes, Yuzu. I'm lost. I need someone to accept these feelings.
Yuzu, however, understanding May better now and having matured as a person, berates May for doing this, saying May is acting selfishly and stops her.
What's your deal, huh? Why can't you think of my feelings for once?
May doesn't just stop because she found love or because Yuzu is such a good plaything. May begins to change because Yuzu provides both comfort and pushback. Yuzu shows she cares for May as a person, but isn't going to enable May's abusive behavior anymore. Afterwards, May still displays certain toxic habits, such as her possessiveness of Yuzu in front of Matsuri.
You stole Yuzu's kiss, and now it's mine.
And implying she did go along with Matsuri's blackmail, not only to prevent Matsuri from outing May to her family, but also as a test for Yuzu.
I think I was testing Yuzu's reaction, the way you would.
Take it from me, May. You could stand to be a lot more direct.
But this is all still progress as May finally feels loved and supported by her stepmom, stepsister, and her recently unestranged dad, and she continues to progress from here. While the messiness and drama of the school trip arc can be seen as another example of May's toxicity, honestly it read more like a typical messy high school love triangle drama with characters confused about what they want and unsatisfied with what they have. Not to say some of that toxicity isn't there, but it's progressed from how she was in the beginning. The student council arc deals with May coming out of her shell. We see her more comfortable around Yuzu, where the arc opens with Yuzu waking up to May cuddling her with an almost childlike expression on her face. May is finally starting to heal from years of isolation, stress, and sexual abuse. In the Ring arc, Mei is demonstrated to be clueless in romance and social interaction compared to her sexual and sensual boldness in the early volumes. Mei's view of sex and intimacy has changed from the beginning of the manga, where she viewed it as a form of control, something she had to do to make people happy, something done emotionlessly, something done in exchange for something else. Despite implying she has sexual experience, Mei is completely clueless when it comes to dating, and acts almost innocently when it comes to how romance works for people her age. In the summer school arc, Mei starts acting more affectionate with Yuzu to the point where even Yuzu is confused, such as trying to feed Yuzu, bathing with her, cuddling with her more often and publicly, and demanding Yuzu kiss her more often. Mei has become more comfortable with Yuzu and herself, willing to experiment with her sexuality and set boundaries. In the summer vacation arc, we learn Umi's reason for taking in Mei, a connection overlooked as the parallel between Umi and her stepdaughter Mei. Both are suffering from feelings of grief and isolation. Umi still reels from the death of her first husband despite it being close to a decade since. Likewise, Mei is a girl who lived alone in her father's house since his divorce from her mother until Sho's remarriage.
I've been staying in my father's house.
Really? But your dad's always traveling. You must have been by yourself for a while.
I haven't really seen my father in almost 5 years.
Umi's grief permeates the narrative in the background like stage props. In the Student Council arc, we also learn that Yuzu dyes her hair blonde to be like her deceased dad's. This causes Mei not to want Yuzu to dye her hair or change her hair, saying it looks good on her in contrast to her student council position of having to ban hair dye. Umi's grief is what inspires her to adopt Mei and marry Sho in the first place. When Mei leaves to live with her grandfather early in the series, Umi cries and remarks to Yuzu, "Sorry, it just reminded me of when we lost your father." While Yuzu is lost in her mind on what to do about Mei, it's Umi's reaction and grief that pushes Yuzu over the edge to bring Mei back under their roof. And Umi isn't simply using Mei as a tool to escape her own grief. She's very much aware of the problems Mei has, and that's why she considers becoming her stepmother in the first place. Umi's not trying to care for Mei for her own sake. Rather, it's from a place of empathy and understanding. As the series continues, Mei goes to Umi for advice on life and love. Mei continues to come out of her aggressive shell thanks to the support of Yuzu, her friends, and her family. They heal together. Yet we learn that Mei is still expected to enter into an arranged marriage by the end of the series. Despite Mei's progress, she's still stuck in this fiancé game. She's still in the cycle of abuse. Utagawa, her final fiancé, comments on how, quote, mature Mei is in the arranged marriage arc. This, however, is a false maturity. How often do we see survivors of trauma be called mature for their age? How often are these signs of abuse and not maturity? Mei's false maturity is another symptom of trauma. The problem isn't that Mei didn't heal enough in time. The problem was that Mei had never left the cycle in the first place. Ultimately, no matter how much our characters do heal, they're still a part of a system that prevents them from fully recovering from their abuse and trauma. While Mei has come a long way from the beginning of the series to the end, that isn't enough to escape the system of arranged marriages people such as herself and other students at Aihara Academy are forced into. To Citrus's credit, it portrays cycles of abuse and trauma not simply as personal problems, but institutional ones. No matter how much effort Yuzu, Mei, and their support group pour into overcoming their individual issues, they are still stuck in a system that perpetuates their abuse, whether it be forcing girls into marriages without their consent and without consideration for their feelings or sexuality, creating rules to stamp out counter and subcultures not homogenous to the mainstream culture, or just general homophobia. In the same way trauma and abuse make kids appear to mature faster, the institutions and society they live within force them into mature situations before they're capable. In other words, the cycles of abuse and trauma do not exist outside of conformity culture, expectations of the society they live in, and institutions. They exist in unity, and thus we need to look more specifically at how Citrus portrays conformity, institutionalization, and societal expectations to get a better grasp of what it's saying about abuse, grief, and trauma. Yuzu's school Aihara Academy is a microcosm of contemporary class-S relationships, fleeting, lesbian until graduation romances. Yet, the reason the setting produces so many of these relationships isn't because lesbian relationships are fleeting or that these relationships lack a genuine expression of same-sex attraction, but the fact that, quote, the parents will decide for them who they should be marrying. The students at Aihara Academy are not necessarily victims of fleeting feelings or insincere feelings, but the inability to have a chance to even figure out if these feelings fade or if it's experimentation or lasting. As cliche as it is to bring up Romeo and Juliet when discussing romance in media, the tragedy of the play was not of true love but of young love, and how the title characters will never get a chance to see their feelings come to fruition. The system in place caused their tragedy and prevented their futures. The same is true with the students at Ihata Academy. Whether fleeting or not, it doesn't matter, because as many of the characters point out, they've had fiancés since they were children, babies, and sometimes even before they were born. Citrus creates a setting in which class-S relationships can thrive to show how they thrive. Not from lesbian relationships inherently being a phase or peculiars of puberty, but due to the power structures and control of these girls' lives before they're even born. Queer or not, these girls never get a choice in the first place. We see this theme early on when Harumin tells Yuzu,
"This school's part of an escalator system, so most of these sheltered little flowers have been classmates since elementary. I started here in high school though, so I'm pretty much in the same boat as you. Kindred spirits!"
Well, I guess you are like me.
In other words, it's the only way they know.
Ihata Academy is cliquey and conservative, isolating those different and not there from the beginning, i.e. people like Harumin and Yuzu. We also learn that Mei, like a lot of these girls, already has a fiancé.
She's engaged? Isn't she a little young for that, though?
No, not if you're the chairman's granddaughter who's supposed to inherit the school one day.
To which Yuzu responds,
I bet she's never had a chance to date or fall in love either.
This gets elaborated upon when Harumin later comments on the lesbian relationships at Ihata Academy, saying,
I mean, it's not like they plan to stay together forever or anything. They just want to have a little fun while they still can. Think about it. A lot of these girls are already engaged. Wouldn't you want to fool around some and get that kind of experimentation out of your system before you tied the knot too? We're swimming in a sea of raging hormones.
Early on, we see the cycle of doomed lesbian relationships and how places like Ihata Academy create class-S relationships that reiterate dangerous stereotypes about lesbian relationships. And identity. The student council arc is a microcosm of how dominant cultures try to stamp out counter and subcultures. Okay, so conflict theory 101 here, but there are two ways an institution governs. It governs through consent and force. Governing through consent is called civil society, and it gains control of the population through things such as culture, family structure, media, education, religion, etc. Governing through force is called political society, and it gains control of society via legislation, law enforcement, military power, etc. Both are used to maintain hegemony, the ruling ideology of a given institution. Usually, though, an institution focuses on one over the other. When civil society is strong, political society is weak, and vice versa. For example, if civil society can instill a sense of patriotic duty to fight for one's country and create a surplus of troops to deploy during wartime, political society either wouldn't need to legislate a draft or enforce it. The population is already enlisting by their own will. Compare, for example, the fact that the United States only needed to draft 8% of the Union Army, including paid substitutes, during the Civil War, where 698,000 served at its peak, as opposed to the Vietnam War, where 543,000 served at its peak, and they drafted 25% of their armed forces. And it faced a much larger and longer pushback. This isn't to say that there was no pushback against conscription during the Civil War, but political society had to work harder during Vietnam to build up an army. There are other factors, of course, and this isn't the full story for either, but it all exists within the same system. Anyway, back to the manga about the sisters kissing. There's this idea in sociology called social reproduction that describes the processes that ensure the self-perpetuation of a social structure over time. When Nene is introduced during the student council arc, she's a walking example of it. She's a middle schooler who's a huge fan of Yuzu's and thus tries to dress and act like her. So instead of being a reproduction of the dominant culture, she's a reproduction of a counterculture, namely the Geru subculture Yuzu belongs to. Her purpose in this arc is to show both how subcultures are reproduced and how they are stamped out by dominant cultures, such as Ihata Academy. A big problem with a good amount of Yuri is that they never confront homophobia. On one hand, it's nice to read about two or more girls having romantic feelings for each other without having to confront the ugly realities that some people in society still don't accept gay people. In the same way we use art to escape reality, however, we can also use it to confront it. I think one of the reasons Yuri doesn't confront the societal issues of gay women is because the cast consists mostly of other gay women. Which isn't unusual, gay people happen to always find each other somehow. And of course, the usual setting is an all-girls school where romantic friendships between girls are accepted as a phase most go through until graduation. These two elements help put most work in a bubble. Citrus's cast of men is microscopic. On screen, we've met only Sho, Mei's grandfather, Amamiya-sensei, and Utagawa, so it seems like Citrus would fall into the same trap of setting itself in a vacuum. Citrus, however, surprisingly wants to touch on the homophobic aspects of Japanese society. During the Ring arc in Volume 6, Yuzu runs into her old friends from her old school who we haven't seen since the first volume. Wanting to catch up with them, she's excited to tell them she's dating the person of her dreams, while acknowledging that they'll probably be shocked that she's dating a girl. Before she's able to tell her friends about her relationship, however, her friends comment on a lesbian couple in the streets, saying nobody wants to see that. Yuzu tries to defend the couple, but her friends shrug it off, saying it's not like they can hear us. The two then tease Yuzu, jokingly asking her if she's dating a girl herself before dismissing it with a "yeah right" and laughing. This is what leads to Yuzu's breakdown, where she seeks Mei for comfort, asking, "Is it okay for me to love you?" To which Mei replies yes. It's Mei's advice that there's, quote, "nothing you and I can do about other people's opinions about the two of us," and that there's, quote, "no right answer. All we can do is what we are doing." That gives Yuzu enough courage to give Mei the ring she had been saving up for the entire volume. It should be pointed out that not only is it taboo for same-sex couples to publicly display affection, it's also taboo for couples in general to publicly display affection in Japan, so it's not just that Yuzu is defending a lesbian couple in public, she was going against another deeply rooted taboo in Japanese culture as well. Another example of how conformity, institutionalization, and societal expectations help stamp out queer relationships in heteronormative society is during the summer school arc. First off, isn't summer school like conformity, institutionalization, and societal expectations the concept? Anyway, Yuzu meets Shirapon and the two become fast friends, but Shirapon has both an obsession with Mei and psychic-like intuition. This causes Yuzu to become more distant from Mei so their relationship isn't found out. Unfortunately, Mei is trying to be more affectionate with Yuzu at this time to better understand her own feelings, causing a rift between the two. In this situation, we see how heteronormative and homogenous society teaches people to be afraid of being labeled as other or a minority, and how these fears manifest problems in their relationships. Even though Shirapon is ultimately understanding of Mei and Yuzu's relationship, society makes us suspicious of anyone, especially after Yuzu dealt with the homophobia of her old friends. Heteronormative and homogenous societies teach us to be scared and to hide, and this not only keeps us from ever feeling a part of a community, it often damages our relationships as well. The macro and the micro are not independent, but part of the same whole. From explicit factors such as school rules to implicit ones such as societal expectations, Citrus is concerned with the relationship between the psychological aspects of individual characters and the sociology of the system in which they live and how both exist in unity. Citrus creates a setting in which class S tropes and elements can flourish to show how many of the negative elements and harmful stereotypes towards lesbian relationships, as a result, are not because these elements or stereotypes are intrinsically true. In other words, Citrus asserts that Class S tropes created these stereotypes and not that these stereotypes created Class S. This obfuscation of the truth by reversal of cause and effect is indicative of another theme of Citrus, appearance and deception. As we discussed with the previous theme, Citrus loves to use hindsight to reframe previous scenes of the narrative. In the same way Citrus is interested in the appearance and deception of how institutions obscure the truth, Citrus loves to use and explore appearance and deception narratively. Citrus opens with a lie. Yuzu tells her friends all the fake experiences and love she's had with boys, despite never once being in love or even having her first kiss. This sets the standard of the series, as Yuzu is forced to use lies and faulty appearances to navigate her new life, yet she is also forced to navigate through the lies and the faulty appearances of others as well, including her new stepsister Mei, Mei's childhood friend Himiko, Yuzu's childhood friend Matsuri, the Tachibana sisters, and so on. The microcosm of this theme is Mei and Yuzu's relationship. While they are dating, they use the appearance of being stepsisters as a cover for their closeness and intimacy, something that both helps protect them from the ridicule of being a lesbian couple in a homophobic society, but also fortifies said ridicule by making coming out even harder as a lesbian couple who are stepsisters. Citrus uses appearance and deception to explore the unspoken worlds of gay women stuck in systems not concerned with their well-being. Yuzu is being deceived from Volume 1 through the entire series. Mei, Himiko, Matsuri, and Nina all deceive Yuzu in different ways and for different reasons. Mei speaks ambiguously, often saying one thing and doing another. Himiko is perhaps the most straightforward. She actively lies to Yuzu to keep Mei to herself. Matsuri is as complicated as Mei, though views everything in the form of a game to be won or lost. And Nina tries to manipulate Yuzu into accepting Sarah and Mei's relationship by withholding information and engineering conversations to go in specific ways. We see that people are deceptive for different reasons. Mei seems to hide her intentions and motivations behind ambiguity as a defense mechanism, never letting her true wants and needs out. Himiko does it out of jealousy over her relationship with Mei. Matsuri does it for personal amusement, and Nina does it for her sister's happiness. Many of these characters stop at some point, however. Mei's ambiguity lessens as she continues to express her wants and needs more as the series goes on. Himiko, after her friendship with Mei is restored and she admits defeat to Yuzu, no longer tries to actively deceive Yuzu. Likewise, Nina stops after Sarah admits defeat to Yuzu. Matsuri is the most interesting because even after she turns over a new leaf, everyone assumes the worst of her, which is funny. She uses this to her advantage by saying truthful things with no one believing her. She does still lie or deceive from time to time, but it's not as much of a habit or as malicious as before. It's a sign she's growing out of viewing relationships as a game. In the ring arc, Yuzu wants something external to acknowledge Mei and her relationship, i.e. the rings. The deception comes in the sense that being stepsisters acts as a cover for their closeness. The story uses Mei and Yuzu's status as stepsisters as a way to deepen the drama and a metaphor of coming out. A friend of mine remarked when reading this section, quote, "Honestly, the whole stepsister thing seems like a useful euphemism for being closeted too. Like, the shame and concern about what others will think at a different level. The appearance of sisterhood allows for Mei and Yuzu's intimacy to hide in plain sight, but it also compounds the shame and ridicule they might feel for coming out with their relationship. In the same way that many Class S stories never move past sisterhood between the two girls, Citrus demonstrates the anxieties of moving beyond a sister-like bond and into a romantic relationship. This is the same issue that was critiqued in the 5th episode of the 2016 Yuri anime Flip Flappers, which depicted being stuck in an endless time loop within a Class S all-girls Catholic school as horror. Whereas Flip Flappers was more critical of the concept of never moving forward beyond Class S tropes, Citrus is more sympathetic to those stuck in Class S-like relationships, showing the anxieties of these people while still being critical of it. It's an interesting irony that the series opens with Yuzu lying to her friends about being with a guy despite having no experience.
I've kept up the charade until now. Yeah, after the mixer we totally went to second base. What? Wow.
And in the middle of the series, Yuzu is forced to keep quiet about her real experience with love because it's with a girl. It's indicative of the society Citrus is set in that girls feel forced to lie about their experience with heterosexual relationships while hiding any experience of same-sex desire. And we see how this happens in real time. We discussed Yuzu's friends' ridicule of a same-sex couple in the previous chapter, but it's important to emphasize how they ridicule for their own sake. They know the couple won't hear, and we see how despite the fact they won't hear, it still does damage because it not only prevents Yuzu from coming out to them, but also causes Yuzu to have a mental breakdown, questioning her own relationship, feelings, and orientation. Citrus says civil society is used to force queer people into hiding and potentially promote compulsory heterosexual relationships. We saw it enforced via arranged marriages for the upper class, and now we see it enforced through microaggressions and heteronormativity for the middle and working classes. Yuri often lacks the act of coming out. It's ubiquitous in Western gay media, yet mostly missing in Yuri media. Instead, what we see in Yuri is that coming out tends to be replaced by expressing one's feelings. It's not so much I am gay as I'm a person who likes you. The latter feels more circumstantial. While there's often a confession between the couple, admitting to another that one is dating another woman is seen as explicit a confession as we understand I am gay or I am bi to be. Coming out in Yuri is seen as a political act, for once a character, or the characters around them, see the character as lesbian, that's the door that can't be closed. As I quoted in the section on Class S, saying I am gay in an apparently homogenous society is to label as oneself other and minority. This is, in any society, a political act. I say all this to frame how important and surprising it is that Citrus acknowledges the political importance of coming out, and ends with a marriage. We'll talk more about the marriage later. Still, the coming out is important both politically and thematically because it's a rejection of the appearance and deception the series and characters have used throughout. Mei and Yuzu have used the cover of being stepsisters to explain their closeness and intimacy. While this has shielded them from suspicion of and ridicule for being in a same-sex relationship, it has also limited them by forcing them to walk a tightrope between intimacy that can be excused by their cover and wanting to acknowledge their relationship as romantic. It's this lack of acknowledgement by those outside that ultimately threatens their relationship by forcing Mei into an arranged marriage. Mei continues to hide her relationship and thus her true feelings, represented by the fact she still wears the ring Yuzu got her as a necklace despite being resigned to marry Utagawa. Yuzu, on the other hand, makes her feelings known to her friends and family, to fight for her happiness. Yuzu doesn't just come out, she makes a tour of it, coming out to her mom, her stepfather, who is also the father of Mei, her best friend Harumin, who has been left in the dark, and even Nene. Likewise, she has to come out to Utagawa and her step-grandfather as well. Mei and Yuzu don't just come out, they get married. The legality of their marriage is up for debate due to the law surrounding same-sex marriage in real-life contemporary Japan, but marriage is most definitely a political act for a same-sex couple. It's political because even if the country where it takes place doesn't recognize the partnership, it forces everyone around the couple to relate to them as a couple. Citrus advocates the importance of visibility in a homogenous society, even if it labels oneself as other and minority. I want to stick solely to just Citrus, mainly because Citrus Plus is still ongoing, so I don't want to make any definitive comments on something likely to change. But at least in this case, the story arc I want to talk about has been done for several chapters and volumes now, and talking about it helps paint a fuller picture of Subaru Uta's intention with the series. Yuzu's openness about her relationship with Mei is important in two parts of Citrus Plus. First, in Volume 2, Yuzu helps a new student council member and closet lesbian, Sayaka, unpack her internalized homophobia. Second, Yuzu finally comes out to her old friends who made the homophobic remarks during the Ring arc, causing them to apologize for their previous actions and give the couple their full support. This is also foreshadowed in the main series since Mei and Yuzu's distant finale wedding showed the two there. What's important, however, is that Yuzu is never forced out. Yuzu makes her decision to come out because she wants to, because she believes that's the only way she will be happy. While some people knew Mei and Yuzu were dating before this was usually because they figured it out themselves or were directly involved with something related to the relationship. No one outs Yuzu. Yuzu didn't need to come out. But she chose to because she couldn't be with Mei if they kept their relationship only as stepsisters, siblings by marriage. Instead, Yuzu decided to peel back the cover and define the relationship as romantic. They were lovers, they'll be lovers, and she will propose and make Mei her wife. The cover of sisterhood that Mei and Yuzu hide under reminded me of two other recent anime, 2021's Wonder Egg Priority and Sunny Boy. In both series, teens go into alternate worlds that are at first scary and hostile, requiring them to grow mature to survive, but as they get more comfortable in these alternate worlds, the worlds become more of a crutch or hindrance to their growth. What was once a hostile land becomes a security blanket, a place to escape the harsh realities of the real world. Both series finales have the characters either leave the alternate world or never return to it, forcing them to finally take what they've learned from their time there to confront reality as different people. Mei and Yuzu's use of stepsisters as a cover reminds me of this to an extent. From the beginning, it acts as a security blanket for them, but they cannot stay there forever. If they did, their relationship would have never come to fruition, never become acknowledged by friends and family, or by the public at large. Using a cover provided safety, but it didn't provide eternity. As much as Citrus loves to utilize appearance and deception, it ultimately rejects it by the end of the narrative. Only by coming out with their relationship are Mei and Yuzu able to earn a happy ending for themselves, help free themselves from the cycles institutions place them in, and truly heal. Citrus sees the political importance of coming out, a trope often missing in Yuri, and it ends it with a same-sex marriage, something still limited in Japan, both in terms of legal protection and legitimacy. While it might be more symbolic than anything in Citrus's case, it's the ultimate acknowledgement of Mei and Yuzu's relationship, something they had gotten very little of throughout the series, and it again shows a somewhat political bent to Citrus's ethos for ending with the political act of marriage after acknowledging the political importance of coming out. No longer using the cover of stepsisters, Mei and Yuzu can finally acknowledge the relationship as between spouses. And this liminal space between sisters and lovers brings us to the next theme Citrus covers: different forms of love. Early on in the narrative, Yuzu is torn between being Mei's stepsister or her lover. As we discussed in Appearance and Deception, Citrus distinguishes between the two roles and how they fill different needs and are often in conflict with one another. While Mei and Yuzu still exist in a liminal space between sister and lover, even after Yuzu confesses to Mei, it isn't until the appearance of stepsisters is shattered that Mei and Yuzu can move on to the next step of their relationship. While Yuzu's dilemma hangs over the entire series, Citrus is also concerned with different forms of love, such as familial, romantic, and platonic, as well as how these loves develop and how they differ. We see how Yuzu discovers her queer feelings and how they differ from familial affection, but we also see Mei organically work through her feelings for Yuzu, how Matsuri's feelings turn from romantic to platonic, and how families as support systems matter. Something apparent in the series is the idea of familial love versus romantic love, as well as the difference between the role a sister serves and the role a lover serves. This is the crux of the entire second and third acts of the anime adaptation. While by episode 3 or chapter 4 of the manga, Mei has decided to return to living with Yuzu and Ume, and Yuzu is no longer expelled from her school, Yuzu begins to feel uneasy. Mei has finally acknowledged Yuzu and Ume as family, something Yuzu had thought she wanted earlier, but this leaves Yuzu conflicted. Yuzu realizes she has romantic feelings for her new stepsister, and she realizes that being a good sibling and being a good lover isn't compatible. Yuzu struggles with this dichotomy for the rest of the anime, up into including volume 4 of the manga. I think it's a fascinating conflict, how you can only do so much trying to fill both roles, but being unable to do either to their fullest together. Yuzu has to choose to be Mei's stepsister or attempt at being Mei's girlfriend. Excuse me for getting personal, but part of the reason I like this is that I found myself in a similar junction when I was younger. I had a crush on a friend at the time, and my infatuation was getting in the way of me being the best friend I could be for this person. Basically, due to my jealousy, they had a hard time discussing their romantic relationships with me, whether they be positive or negative things. Then finally one day they snapped and said, "Your being in love with me prevents you from truly being my friend." I was hurt, but it was true. My point is that this struggle of being unable to reconcile two incompatible roles applies to more than just falling for your stepsister. It's that old cliche, don't date your therapist. There's a conflict of interest where neither role can be filled to its fullest. This conflict comes to a head in the last 3 episodes of the anime, manga chapters 13 to 17. After rejecting Mei's offer of sex, Yuzu tries to confess properly to Mei, saying,
How do I say it? If I'm being honest, I love you.
But then adds,
Because we're stepsisters. So I'm saying you mean a lot to me since you're part of my family now.
Yuzu's trying to have her cake and eat it here, but this moment makes Yuzu realize she can't stay at this fork between sisters and lovers anymore. While Yuzu can try to stay comfy under the blankets of Mei being her family, she finds that isn't enough for her. Yuzu loves Mei romantically, and thus Yuzu must leave the vague liminal space between the two and commit to Mei as a lover.
I thought you were bae. Turns out you're just fam. Bruh.
When the Tachibana sisters are introduced in the school trip arc, they both act as idealized divergent routes for Yuzu to take. They are the Kaoru to Yuzu's Shinji. Sarah represents Yuzu's idealized self, able to both admit her feelings to herself and the person she loves, despite the person she loves being another woman.
It's not all that complicated. Whenever I find somebody I have feelings for, it doesn't matter what their gender is. This time, the person I like just happens to be a girl. She says it like it's the simplest thing in the world.
Nina represents Yuzu's other option, giving up her feelings and being the ultimate supportive sister, willing to manipulate and engineer things for her sister's happiness. Yuzu is caught between the two during the school trip arc of the series, and it's only Yuzu's rejection of both when she's able to confess her feelings to Mei. Because, while Sarah represents Yuzu's ideal sense of self, the path of Sarah would have ultimately made her unhappy because Sarah is too selfless. Sarah was willing to give up Mei because she knew it would make Mei and Yuzu happier. Yuzu, by going against Nina's wish for Yuzu to support Sarah and Mei, is rejecting the role of Nina as well. Yuzu has to reject Nina and thus the role of the idealized sister, and Sarah and thus the role of the selfless person. Yuzu has to acknowledge what she wants and understand that love will be selfish, and that's okay. If you were to ask me when Mei fell for Yuzu, I'd say it was at some point during chapter 7 or 8, episode 6 of the anime, with the electric kiss between Mei and Yuzu during that being the confirmation. Mei reacts completely differently to that kiss than the others, including when Yuzu kisses Mei in the principal's office during chapter 4/episode 3. Likewise, after this kiss, Mei treats Yuzu differently. This is after Yuzu helps Mei reconcile with her father. Some may say Mei starts to fall for Yuzu because of this act, but I argue it's only part of the reason, or at least there is more to it than that. Reconciling with her father has both re-established her relationship with her father and gives Mei the support to start healing. I'd argue that Yuzu was right when she said,
What Mei needs right now isn't romance, it's support from her family.
However, once she finally has that support from both Ume and Sho, now Mei can finally engage with people romantically. So yes, I think Yuzu's act of reconnecting Mei with her father is part of why Mei falls for Yuzu, because it's also what allows Mei to be able to fall for Yuzu. As we discussed in cycles of abuse, grief, and trauma, survivors of abuse and trauma are often in stasis, feeling as though time has stopped. One of the first indicators we see that Mei is healing is her opening of her father's letters. Time is no longer stopped. Mei can start to move on, and she can start living her life in the moment. The student council arc is the first time we see defects in Harumin's personality. Prior, she was just a supportive friend, but we now see her flaws, why she's a stealth Geiru, and how she reacts under pressure. This entire arc is about Mei trying to reconcile her role as president and role as a lover. In fact, compromise might be the theme of the arc. Yuzu was more of a supporting protagonist this time around, ultimately helping Mei find compromise and helping Harumin gain the courage to stand up to her older sister and re-establish a relationship with her just the same. If Mei and Yuzu are the romantic core of Citrus, Harumin and Yuzu are the platonic core. While there's a huge shipping culture around Harumin and Yuzu to the point where Sabaru Uta made an audience standing character for it, the difference in Yuzu's relationship with Mei and Harumin is important. It's this difference that motivates Yuzu during the student council arc. Even Mei acknowledged that Yuzu's picking her best friend over her lover. Here we see concretely how both these roles diverge. Likewise, the student council arc is about reconciling different roles a person plays. Yes, Yuzu's Mei's lover, but she's also Harumin's best friend. And yes, Mei is Yuzu's lover, but she's also the student council president. This arc is about acknowledging these separate roles and reconciling them. By the end of the arc, Yuzu's been both a good friend to Harumin and a lover to Mei, and Mei has been a good lover to Yuzu and the president of her school. Matsuri's relationship with Yuzu is one of the most interesting in the series. Matsuri is Yuzu's childhood friend and considers Yuzu her older sister, or Oni-chan, as well. As well as harbors romantic feelings for Yuzu. Matsuri's rivalry with Mei is because Mei also fits into both roles at the same time of meeting. Mei is Yuzu's stepsister and younger sister, or Imoto. And the object of Yuzu's affection. Mei fits both roles, yet Yuzu truly loves Mei as a lover and not as a sibling, whereas Yuzu only sees Matsuri as a younger sister even after Matsuri kisses her, talks lewdly to her, and tries to take her on dates. While wrestling with her feelings for Mei, it becomes apparent how much Yuzu doesn't see Mei as a sister by the way Yuzu treats Matsuri as one. It's obvious to us, the audience, that Yuzu is simply in denial rather than genuinely unsure. Matsuri is like a more extreme and more confused version of Yuzu. Matsuri is conflating familial love and romantic love. So it's not just that Matsuri wants both from Yuzu, Matsuri assumes a rejection of one is a rejection of the other, yet Yuzu cannot be both, thus Matsuri will never be satisfied. Matsuri changes after conceding Yuzu to Mei, still wanting to be in both their lives, acting almost like a little sister to both of them. She acts more like the annoying little sister rather than the older sister worshipping type, and while it might confuse things for me to say this, but she begins to act more like a friend or little sister as the manga goes on, namely trying to support Mei and Yuzu's relationship. This is most apparent during the summer vacation arc, where Matsuri plans the whole summer vacation to give Mei and Yuzu alone time to the point where she even rigs the room distributions. It's her dedication to try to keep Mei and Yuzu together that leads to her freakout upon learning that Mei is arranged to marry someone else. Yet despite commenting that she was holding back her feelings for Yuzu so Yuzu could be happy with Mei, Matsuri doesn't pounce at a chance at Yuzu. Matsuri has settled into her role as Yuzu's friend and little sister, instead being there to act as emotional support for Yuzu and being the one to concoct the plan to get Mei and Yuzu back together. As discussed in Appearance of Deception, by the end, with all the lies uncovered and the truths out, everyone begins to fill their roles. Harumin is Yuzu's best friend, Mei is Yuzu's fiance, Matsuri is Yuzu's little sister, and Umi and Sho are Mei and Yuzu's understanding and supportive parents. Throughout the entire series, Mei and Yuzu have established a support system of honest and caring friends and family who all fill different roles in their lives. Citrus is a story about young women figuring themselves out. And what's more complex and ubiquitous than love? A word we use is all-encompassing, yet can be used to mean so many similar but different things. Citrus acknowledges its dynamic and amorphous nature by depicting these feelings evolving, changing, and being mistaken for something else. Love isn't easy, especially when you're young. As cliche as it is to say this about media targeting a young audience, Citrus is a coming-of-age story, one that deals with sexuality, trauma, deception, and institutionalization. No one is the same at the beginning of Citrus as they are at the end. Honestly, I didn't think I needed a whole section dedicated to coming of age as a theme, because I would have thought it would get indirectly covered enough by the other themes. But it came up so much in my notes that I felt like I had to add it for completion's sake. So consider this tying up loose ends. I think the importance of the coming-of-age theme in Citrus is how it contrasts with the false sense of maturity introduced by the abuse, grief, and trauma Citrus also explores. When Mei is no longer in defensive mode, we see how lopsided her maturity is. While a responsible student and respectable student council president, Mei is also bad with people, is inexperienced in intimacy and affection from friends and family, has a hard time articulating her wants and needs, and despite having implied sexual experience, is innocent when it comes to romantic love. Again, most of this is tied to her being a survivor of sexual abuse, but that's the point. Abuse and trauma artificially mature someone, and on the surface, it simply appears as though they are mature for their age. This is in contrast with how Mei matures organically along with her healing throughout the series. The summer school arc is a commentary on how much Mei has changed since the beginning of the series, as commented on by Shirapon. We also see how sexual experience doesn't equate with emotional maturity. Yuzu demonstrates this early on with her lying about her experience with boys as a way to seem more mature, despite being clueless about love and sex and still coming of age. Mei is the most obvious example. She's depicted as being sexually experienced and uses this to dominate and control Yuzu, often using her sexual experience over Yuzu as a way to express her maturity over Yuzu. However, when we see how Mei reacts in romantic situations after the two start dating, Mei is almost a childlike innocence. She needs Yuzu's dream date journal to guide her on dates, and she gets flustered trying to talk to Ume about being in love, spends most of the summer school arc learning her boundaries, and has trouble expressing her wants. Similar to Mei, Matsuri is also a kid playing adult through a perceived sense of sexual knowledge. When she's introduced, she tells Yuzu and Harumin that she sells fake nudes to men for money.
I mean, it's not like I'd be stupid enough to send them pictures of myself. I just find porno pics online and pretend it's me. Then I send a few texts and those pervs don't know the difference.
She not only emphasizes the sexual aspect of this, but also how she's loaded from doing it. Matsuri creates a connection with finances, sexuality, and maturity. But as she tells Harumin and Yuzu about it, it comes off as a kid trying hard to impress their peers. Matsuri is a blunt character, but her bluntness with sexual talk seems to come from a place of insecurity and a desire to be seen as more mature and adult than she is. Much of her story revolves around her trying to be seen as something else, such as trying to have Yuzu view her romantically while Yuzu only views Matsuri platonically. But Yuzu sees through this, and she still knows that Matsuri is a kid playing at adulthood.
She tries to act all grown up, but anybody can see she's still just a kid. It makes you want to look out for her.
This contrast between artificial maturity and organic maturity becomes more apparent during the final arc, when Mei feigns maturity by rushing to leave school and be married. This illustrates both how different the mask of artificial maturity is from the organic growth we've seen with Mei, and how institutions and systems play a role in abuse and healing. In the case of Mei, the system she is stuck in encourages her abuse and mitigates her healing. We also see how Mei is miserable during the arranged marriage and final arcs. By the arranged marriage arc, Mei has come so far, but it still isn't enough to save her from the institution and traumas that shackled her, because while personal support is important, it can't fix the problem if the problem is structural. We've talked about how Matsuri and Mei have grown in the chapters on different forms of love and cycles of abuse, grief, and trauma respectively, so I want to discuss how Yuzu, our lead, grows since this is her story. Yuzu starts as a clueless romantic and ends with her marrying the love of her life. Yuzu is an idealized form of love, so idealized in fact that what she imagines her love life to be turns out completely different than what it ends up being. Yuzu starts off saying she'll get a boyfriend in no time, even fantasizing about the first guy she sees at her new school, which comes off less as genuine attraction and more like compulsory heterosexuality. The series ends, however, with her marrying a woman. While initially getting with Mei isn't easy and requires Yuzu to learn about how love comes in different forms, as we mentioned in the last section, Yuzu still has a naive view of love as they start dating. It isn't until the ring arc when Yuzu learns that love is not all sunshine and roses, and that it'll be tough, especially in her situation, to continue to love Mei. It's the support she gets from Mei, however, that gives her the confidence to continue. One of the biggest lessons she learns from that arc is not carrying everything on her own. She's in a partnership and she needs to start acting like it. Yuzu also expresses what she wants out of the relationship. A microcosm of this is the end of the summer vacation arc, when Yuzu tells Mei that she has never told Yuzu she loves her. After Mei leaves for her arranged marriage, Yuzu displays some maturity by not immediately running to Mei, understanding that Mei is doing this for Mei's future in the school. When Yuzu does finally decide to go after Mei, however, Yuzu does so by coming out to her family and friends, making plans for the future, and understanding the concrete repercussions of her actions. While Yuzu loses her wide-eyed, idealized view of love, she never loses her optimistic view of love. She accepts the good with the bad, the struggle and the victories, the present and the future. It makes sense that love would be such a prominent theme since every chapter has it in the title. So yeah, this manga series about teenagers targeted toward teenagers about growing up, maturing, and coming of age. Who would have thought? Yeah, this one has been a lot shorter and more informal than the other sections, but this was just a collection of loose threads I couldn't fit anywhere else, and I figured this more casual take would make y'all less likely to think of me as completely up my own ass.
Set the cheetahs on the loose. There's a thief.
Along with Citrus's themes, the other thing I find most engaging is its characters. I consider the series to have 4 leads. Mei and Yuzu Aihara, obviously, but as the series goes on, both Harumin and Matsuri become more integral to the plot. Yuzu Aihara is a contemporary version of the Candy Girl, the archetype introduced in the first Yuri manga, Shirohei no Futari, in 1971. This isn't special, to be honest. Many Yuri have used this archetype up to present day, but Yuzu is one of the most obvious examples, as Mei and her are some of the most on the nose. Yuzu's arc in the series centers on her inexperience with love and her optimism. She has an idealized view of what love is and how it should be, despite never being in a relationship. We don't know if Yuzu is a lesbian or some other genre of sapphic, but my reading of her character is that any attraction to boys was compulsory heterosexuality. Her attraction to men was simply how she thought love was supposed to be, despite admitting to never being in love before meeting Mei. But this isn't an episode of my favorite game show, Compet or Internalized Biphobia, so I'll leave it at that. Despite Yuzu's initially rocky relationship with Mei and the obstacles she faces when they start dating, Yuzu never gives up. She becomes humbled and her idealized version of love proves false, but she never stops being optimistic about love. It's her optimism in the face of adversity that makes it so endearing. She isn't optimistic because the world is simple, she's optimistic because the world is complex. Adversity has not caused Yuzu's optimism to wane, it has caused it to solidify. Yuzu's more pragmatic, albeit still optimistic version of love comes to a head during both the school trip arc and the final arc. In the school trip arc, she has to realize she can be selfish in love, which ultimately leads to her dating Mei and not falling into the same trap Sarah does. In the final arc, Yuzu is confronted with the dilemma that is that she still wants to be with Mei, even though Mei marrying Utagawa would guarantee Mei inheriting Aihara Academy. While initially presented as an either-or choice, Yuzu decides that even if it fails, she wants to have a try for a world where she can be with Mei and Mei can inherit the academy. It's what separates Mei from Yuzu. Mei is resigned to failure while Yuzu tries for success. Despite her appearing to be the typical dumb blonde, Yuzu is shown to be perceptive, emotionally intelligent, and capable of landing good grades. She finds it easy to empathize with others even when they are being antagonistic to her, such as with Himiko, Mitsuko, Mei, and Nina. Instead, it's Yuzu's impulsiveness and sense of justice that get her into trouble, as while her actions may be justified, they're going against the grain. This includes exposing Aomiya-sensei as having inappropriate relationships with a student in front of the whole school, standing up for a lesbian couple her friends mock, and orchestrating a Mission Impossible-esque plan to get Mei out of her arranged marriage. These often lead to trouble or ridicule for her, but Yuzu doesn't care in the end. It's what she needs to do. Mei is the crimson rose to Yuzu's Candy Girl. By the start of the series, Mei has already given up. Mei has reserved herself to exist for others, apathetic to her wants and needs if it's for the benefit of Aihara Academy. At first, this manifests as Mei living with the abuse of her fiancé in silence and carrying the entire weight of the academy by herself in preparation for her dad's return and eventual inheritance of the academy. Despite this, she seems aware that her dad probably won't become the next chairman based on her not opening any of the letters her dad sends her, and her refusal to bring any of this up to her dad when he does finally come back. Mei is aware of her powerlessness. She wants to be wanted and needed, so when it feels like her dad, quote, no longer needs her because he won't be inheriting the academy, Mei turns to Yuzu to feel needed. This leads to Yuzu berating Mei for using Yuzu's affection for Mei to fill Mei's need to be wanted, instead of considering the feelings of others. This is the start of Mei unlearning many of her toxic traits from years of trauma. Much of Citrus's narrative is, in part, the narrative of Mei's healing, as I said before. Her manipulative actions and seductress demeanor early on were a veil used to hide what is ultimately a scared and lonely kid. Most of these toxic actions towards Yuzu early on reveal themselves to be Mei attempting to feel powerful or in control for once. Mei in the process of healing is almost a different person. While she still has a hard time expressing herself and her wants and needs, she acts awkward and almost innocent instead of authoritative and, quote, mature like before. She remains a good student and effective student council president, but she starts acting like she feels safe for once. She's more open and expressive with Yuzu, Ume, and Himiko than before, even coming to them for advice or to confide in them. It becomes apparent how much Mei has changed since the beginning of Citrus, when she regresses during the arranged marriage and final arcs, when her toxic traits and unhealthy coping mechanisms return and she's miserable. I find that Mei is the most important character in Citrus from a technical standpoint, because if you dislike Mei, chances are you're gonna dislike Citrus. That seems to be the rule I see when people discuss it. People who dislike or hate Mei dislike or hate Citrus. When I first watched and read Citrus, I didn't care for her all that much. I didn't dislike her, I found her interesting, and the contrast between her and Yuzu was well done, but she was far from my favorite character. It wasn't until I was reading Citrus Plus casually that I realized how much I appreciated her development. It became more apparent to me when rewatching the anime and rereading the manga. It was eye-opening to see how much growth she had. Harumi, nicknamed Harumin Tanaguchi, is the best character in the series. She's an outcast at Ihara Academy like Yuzu because she enrolled later than most. Like Yuzu, she's a Geiru, but considers herself a stealth Geiru. That phrase is indicative of Harumin as a whole. She likes to hide in plain sight. Despite being an outcast like Yuzu, she prefers to stay out of trouble, only acting like a Geiru with people she's comfortable with, and often keeps her head down. These traits later cause issues between Yuzu and her. Harumin and Yuzu become fast friends due to their outcast status and Geiru interests. Harumin is an incredibly supportive and understanding friend towards Yuzu, listening to her problems, taking her out to cheer her up, and refusing to abandon her in hardship even if Yuzu is the one to drag her into it. The biggest conflict between the two arises during the student council arc when Harumin's sister almost has Yuzu expelled for dyeing her hair. Harumin thinks Yuzu should keep her head down like she does, but Yuzu ultimately rejects this. Throughout the series, we learn that Harumin is incredibly defensive, keeping up a wall to prevent being hurt. Even Matsuri comments that Harumin is the type of person to never pursue someone they like because they're afraid of it causing future pain. Harumin is also incredibly perceptive, such as seeing through Matsuri's manipulative behavior. Another thing that gets Harumin to lose her cool is her big sister Mitsuko. While Harumin is usually by Yuzu's side, the only time she ever abandons her is when she receives a text from her sister in the Matsuri arc and in the before mentioned student council arc. When Yuzu helps Harumin and Mitsuko reconcile, Mitsuko becomes more considerate of Harumin's thoughts and feelings, and Harumin becomes more open with her sister. The two biggest mysteries surrounding Harumin is if Harumin knew Mei and Yuzu were dating pre-reveal, and if Harumin was/is in love with Yuzu herself. The latter is not helped by when Yuzu does reveal the former to Harumin. Harumin says that she loves Yuzu, quote, as a friend, which could be a parallel to when Yuzu told Mei she liked her as a sister. Another example is that Harumin seems to coincidentally or purposely act in ways that helped push Mei and Yuzu together, such as keeping Himiko distracted during the school trip arc and pacifying Matsuri after Matsuri's breakdown over learning Mei is still engaged during the arranged marriage arc. Also, apparently in track 3 of the Volume 4 drama CD, yes, there was a drama CD, actually there were 2, it's implied that Harumin distracts Himiko when all 4 go to the amusement park so Mei and Yuzu can have alone time. There's also a scene before Yuzu's reveal where Harumin tells Matsuri she doesn't want to hear what's bothering Yuzu from anyone but Yuzu. So, Harumin could know more than she lets on because she wants to only hear it from Yuzu. Despite knowing Yuzu is probably hiding something from her, Harumin has an unwavering hope in Yuzu, equal to the unwavering support of Yuzu. It's because we're best friends, she says. Matsuri is Yuzu's childhood friend who's introduced during the Matsuri arc. She's initially a foil for Mei, being manipulative and toxic and acting as both a sister and romantic option for Yuzu. We first meet her after she consoles a girl for a breakup we learn Matsuri caused in the first place. When she runs into Yuzu for the first time in years, she's eager to tell both her and Harumin how she makes money from selling fake nudes to older men. Matsuri struggles with wanting to be perceived differently than she appears. She wants to be seen as mature, and she wants Yuzu to see her as a potential partner. Matsuri, however, is seen as a young kid playing at adulthood. Yuzu only sees Matsuri as a younger sister. Matsuri is lonely and seems to be constantly seeking attention and admiration from others. When the cast shows appreciation toward Matsuri for setting up the summer vacation in the arc of the same name, Matsuri's sarcastic exterior melts away in a moment, and it's obvious this makes her genuinely happy. Even if she does go stereotypical tsundere, saying, "It's not like I even wanted y'all to come or anything. Baka." It's a rare moment of sincerity from her despite the sun response, because usually she's so dipped in irony and sarcasm that it's tough to tell when she's joking or using her joking exterior to hide her sincerity. Matsuri tends to view things in terms of a game. She views relationships as things that can be won or lost. So when Yuzu shows no romantic interest in her and seems preoccupied with Mei, Matsuri becomes frustrated, saying she lost the game. She begins to unlearn this throughout the series, though still uses game terminology. Despite this, she seems to be more empathetic and caring than before. After the Matsuri arc, Matsuri acts as Yuzu's confidant for Mei and her relationship. While Matsuri still harbors feelings for Yuzu, she seems to be happy in her role of trying to make Mei and Yuzu happy together. When she finds out Mei is still in an arranged marriage, Matsuri becomes distraught and depressed over wasting her time and feelings trying to make Yuzu happy with Mei when it will ultimately be for nothing. Behind Matsuri's abrasive behavior is someone who truly appreciates not just her connection with Yuzu, but with Harumin, Nene, and Mei as well. Not that she'd ever say that to their faces. Like pretty much every character in the series, Matsuri puts up a facade, but as the series progresses, like the rest of the cast, that facade weakens, cracks, and brittles. It's not gone by the end, but it leaves you with the feeling that it will be eventually. Honestly, I know I said Harumin is the best character in Citrus, Matsuri might be my favorite. I once got a piece of writing advice that went, the lower the character starts, the higher they can end up. It's physics. It's the same logic for why Mei feels so different from the start of the series compared to the end, compared to Harumin or Yuzu. Not that they didn't have development and growth, it's just more obvious with Matsuri and Mei. Citrus features an extensive cast outside the 4 leads. The start of the series was obsessed with adding a new romantic rival for Yuzu in each arc, like it was the Yuri version of a battle shonen. If that hasn't been done yet, someone please make it. And like a battle shonen, most of these rivals end up staying around to fill out the cast. Here's a lightning round of the 10 most important supporting characters, but not all of them. Ume is Yuzu's mother. She's caring, kind, and considerate. It was her idea to marry Sho so Mei could have a parental figure around while Sho finds himself during his travels. She treats Mei as her own daughter immediately and takes Mei leaving the first time poorly. The death of her first husband and Yuzu's father causes her to get emotional still. It's the grief of this loss that motivates Ume to adopt Mei in the first place, and try to empathize with Mei's troubles. Ume is invested in both her daughters, but there are notable scenes where Ume helps Mei navigate her feelings, especially that of love during the summer school arc. Ume is also not homophobic, which is cool. She accepts that Mei and Yuzu are queer and in love, and she supports them emotionally and concretely by helping convince Mei's grandfather. Ume probably figured something was going on by the end, especially with how poorly Yuzu took Mei's moving out to be married, but it's clear that her open-mindedness is genuine, since for all the concerns Yuzu had for coming out, it was never for her mother but society as a whole. Yeah, Mei's grandfather never gets a name. He's the most conservative character in the series. His role is to show how even old dogs can learn new tricks, I suppose. He isn't necessarily an evil guy, even if he has some bad takes like insulting his son and calling Yuzu a deviant of all things. He does cancel Mei's engagement with Amamiya-sensei when he learns about Amamiya-sensei's inappropriate behavior. He apologizes to Yuzu after she saves his life. He is ultimately willing to accept Mei and Yuzu's relationship, and Citrus Plus shows that Mei is allowed to inherit the academy without marrying a man. Mei's grandfather shows that to reason with someone, you have to speak their language. While initially seen as hostile and antagonistic, his values are simply the importance of his family, the betterment of Ihata Academy, and the legacy of the two. When everyone can come to an understanding, he can be quite reasonable. He has different values from the likes of Yuzu, Harumin, or Matsuri, but values nonetheless. And it's only when Mei and Yuzu let their relationship be known that they can free themselves from the arrangement system Mei's grandfather has put Mei in. Himiko is Mei's childhood friend. She's the honorary 5th main character, but I didn't have much to write about her, so she's here. Himiko has an unrequited crush on Mei, but ultimately gives up so Mei can be happy with Yuzu. She parallels Matsuri in a lot of ways. There's the childhood friend thing, of course, and being in love with their childhood friend, but ignoring their feelings so said friend can be happy. They also both take up the role of their respective friend's confidant, something they couldn't do before when trying to act on their feelings. Himiko's most interesting aspect is her relationship with Yuzu. Initially love rivals, the two develop an interesting friendship. Yuzu acts polite and inclusive towards Himiko, and Himiko acts above it all but ultimately friendly. Himiko mostly learns to get over herself throughout the series by learning to feel secure about her relationship with Mei and considering the cast as her friends. The crux of this is Himiko helping Yuzu get back with Mei during the final arc despite initially being absent most of it. This action seems to be her final acceptance and her ultimate gamut for Mei's happiness over her own. Heio is the other member of the student council. She's perhaps the most level-headed member compared to the strict Mei and snooty Himiko. She's also older than most of the cast. Her closest relationship is with Mitsuko, who has a soft spot for Keio. The two are implied to be dating, and they both always appear together. She's sweet and kind, and no one ever acts rude to her except maybe Matsuri. Even Mitsuko has a hard time giving Keio her typical prickly attitude. Sho is Mei's absent father. Frustrated with his lot as Aihara Academy's heir and his restrictive lifestyle, he divorces Mei's mother and began teaching abroad. Despite his absence, his character constantly hovers over the series, with both the manga and especially the anime using shots of an airplane to evoke his presence and allude to him. Sho represents someone who realizes late they are unhappy and don't know themselves. His actions to correct this provide him with meaning and happiness, but unfortunately ruins his relationship with his daughter and helps lead to her issues. He's aware of this and marries Ume to help fix things by giving Mei a family that's around. It does take, however, both of them to express their feelings to each other and get over their mutual stubbornness for them to reconcile and truly heal. Sho is the closest character to evoke the going to America trope present in a lot of Yuri, where going to America is a cipher for and they lived happily ever after. Sho isn't implied to be going to America, but to underdeveloped nations to teach and help build schools, but the idea of finding freedom and leaving is still present. It's interesting to note that while Sho can escape, Mei can't, so Mei and Yuzu have to carve their own path where they are. Much of Nina and Sarah's relevance is tied to their roles in the school trip arc, specifically in how they act as foils for Yuzu and expand on the series' theme of different forms of love. Nina is the selfless sister, pulling the strings to ensure her sister's happiness, and Sarah is the selfless and open lover, willing to express her love openly even if it's taboo. Yuzu admires that Sarah can say out loud that she loves another girl, and that Sarah can confess to that girl, something Yuzu has been unable to do. But Sarah's love is too selfless, to the point where she lets Mei go, and despite Nina trying so hard for her sister's happiness, she ultimately didn't understand her sister. Afterwards, they appear scarcely. Sabaru Uta tries to integrate them by having Yuzu call them, specifically Sarah, when she's having a crisis, and needs to talk about her relationship with Mei since it's still a secret to others. But as I said, they rarely appear after their introduction as opposed to the other characters introduced earlier and even later. There's a joke among fans that anime onlys hate Matsuri and love the Tachibana sisters, and manga readers love Matsuri and hate the Tachibana sisters. This is mostly because there's this weird extra chapter where Nina tries to convince Sarah to date her so they can be like Mei and Yuzu. It's weird and it doesn't go anywhere. Also, Sarah's implied to be bi, pan, or demi, which is cool. I wish that would have got elaborated on more. Mitsuko embodies two classic Yuri tropes, chick on the motorcycle and the girl prince. She's introduced as an antagonist during the school council arc, challenging Mei's hypocrisy of running the school with an iron fist while letting certain infractions such as dyed hair go unaddressed. While appearing at first cruel, by the end of the arc it becomes apparent she was trying to have Mei reconcile her actions as opposed to picking between the two. This plays into Mitsuko's role as the girl prince, for although the girl prince wears men's clothing and are aping masculine attitudes, they are understood to be even better women than other women around them. Mitsuko, the girl prince, stands in opposition to Mei, the traditional Japanese beauty, and forces Mei to reconcile her roles as student council president and Yuzu's lover. Friedman writes that for a chick on motorcycle, her motorcycle is code. This woman has been, by her own act of will, freed from society's constraints. She is a woman able to travel as she pleases, not tied down, not beholden to anyone. She's a rebel. She doesn't need your approval. Mitsuko's motorcycle is used to save Mei and Yuzu's relationship in the final arc, as if she's helping Mei and Yuzu in their freedom from society's constraints. As I said in the chapter on conformity, institutionalization, and societal expectations, Nene is the sociological idea of social reproduction in the form of a schoolgirl when she's first introduced in Volume 5. It's Nene replicating Yuzu's style that helps start the student council arc and escalates it. Her replication of Yuzu's style and the school's reaction to it both shows how counter and subcultures reproduce, so to speak, and how the dominant culture tries to prevent this and punish those that partake. After Volume 5, when Nene enrolls in Aihara Academy with Matsuri, she acts as fodder for Matsuri and or Harumin when Yuzu isn't around. She more or less becomes Matsuri's sidekick. Her main characteristic is that she's a Yuzu Harumin shipper. In other words, she's a stand-in for Citrus fans who prefer Yuzu and Harumin as a couple. Similar to the Ikeda sisters from Yuri, Nene has Yuri fangirl fantasies watching Yuzu and Harumin interact. Using her, Sabaru Uta can offer a Yuzu Harumin fan service while acknowledging in the universe that it's all a fantasy and never going to happen. Utagawa is first introduced as Yuzu's boss at a cafe. He also has a friendly relationship with Matsuri, who's a regular there. The two play off each other. When Yuzu discusses getting matching rings with Mei, Utagawa is optimistic and encouraging, while Matsuri is cynical and blunt. He's supportive of Yuzu's relationship despite not knowing who it's with. He also hosts the cast for their little getaway during the summer vacation arc, only asking them for some help with the bed and breakfast he has to run. The biggest irony with him is that he too is running away from his responsibilities as heir to his family business. It's Yuzu's conviction in her relationship with with Mei that inspires him to confront his responsibilities. It's because of this, however, that Mei ends up being engaged to him. In his defense, he had no idea Mei was Yuzu's lover. This also causes him to close the cafe. Utagawa introduces an interesting ambiguity. While Yuzu's determination is something to be admired, it ultimately causes Mei's separation from Yuzu. Yet part of the reason is that Yuzu hides all the details about her love life from Utagawa. And considering how the series ends, it can be implied he wouldn't have gotten engaged with Mei if he knew. Likewise, is him accepting his responsibilities genuine, or does it parallel Mei in that she is only doing it because she feels like she has to and not because she wants to? Ultimately, he seems happier running his humble little cafe. Suzuran, or Shirapan as she's called, is one of the most insane characters Subaruta added to the series. Her introduction alone is a sign that Citrus is a very different series from when it started. She's an alleged psychic who does JoJo poses, and her family is implied to be Yakuza. Like, what the f happened? Shirapan was introduced to make Yuzu more paranoid about keeping her relationship with Mei a secret, since Shirapan has extrasensory abilities and is interested in Mei herself. This causes Yuzu to be distant from Mei, leading to conflict and Mei feeling rejected. Shirapan says she's in love with Mei because she's the only person she can't read, and that makes her seem less like a human and more like a god. After the summer school arc, she's mostly hanging out with Himiko, and those two have a cute ship. She's also one of the few characters who knows Mei and Yuzu are dating pre-Yuzu's coming out tour. Other than all that, she just fills the role of the weird, kinda witchy, kinda astrology friend that every gay friend group has. Now that we've summarized the plot, gone over the themes Citrus is trying to explore, and introduced the characters, it's time to discuss the elephant in the room, Citrus's problematic elements. If you couldn't tell, Citrus has been labeled problematic for a myriad of reasons. There's the incest plot for one, and the non-consensual elements for another. Both are valid concerns on their face, but I feel like they overshadow any discussion of Citrus while critiques remain surface level. I promised we'd talk more about the incest later, so if you've been eagerly anticipating this section of the video ever since I promised it, congrats you fucking weirdo, we're here. As I said at the top of this video, I don't think Citrus's use of incest is done in a purely fetishistic way, and I hope by the end of this video's part on themes, you can see why I think that at least. Again, when knowing and understanding the history and tropes of Yuri, it's hard not to see that the stepsister relationship between Mei and Yuzu is evocative of Class S. Even before being more acquainted with the genre after watching Citrus, I found the series' use of pseudo-incest to be something more than simple fetish material. Had it felt like simple fetish material, I would not be here making this video because Citrus wouldn't be nearly as interesting enough to tunnel to my brain like some weird lesbian parasite. Also, when continuing to talk about Citrus in the context of the genre, I found it fascinating that it was hard to find manga like Citrus. Again, incest in anime, easy. So easy, most of us find it on accident a little too often, to be honest. Incest in Yuri? Not hard to find. Stepfamily in Yuri? Barren. Even in a post-Citrus world where the series has proven to be influential and successful, and when more Yuri is being made than ever, I have a hard time finding Stepfamily Yuri. The most I can find are obscure one-shots, just straight up porn, and like one or two series that come close. Maybe I didn't look hard enough. Maybe there's a series that introduces a stepfamily Yuri relationship as a supporting or cameo couple partway in. Wouldn't be the first time anime introduced surprise incest some ways in after you let your guard down, but I've yet to read or hear about that series. And to iterate my last earlier point, just because a story has incest doesn't mean a series is bad. Yes, I am so jaded by its inclusion in the anime-manga sphere that I just roll my eyes when a series I'm reading or watching throws it in, but that's usually because it just seems to exist in the series for its own sake. The best we can normally expect from incest in the anime-manga sphere is its use as parody or comedy, such as in Yuri or Monogatari, which satirizes incest being played straight in Yuri or otaku culture, respectively. It's not often we get a penguin drum or a monster or even an Evangelion that uses incest beyond fetish material and parodies of that fetish material. Hell, Gankutsuo mainly gets a free pass for it featuring incest because it's an adaptation of European literature concerning nobility. Of course there's gonna be incest in it. White people are crazy. I'm not saying Citrus is up there with Penguin Drum and Monster. I may be defending the series, but I also know its limits. I'm just saying that Citrus has to be doing something right for me to shirk my cynical jadedness and think about how the series is utilizing incest thematically. Also, the stepsister relationship in Citrus is done in perhaps the most tasteful way it could be without undercutting any tension or interest in the narrative. Mei and Yuzu meet before they know they're stepsisters, they show some sort of connection or interest before knowing as well, as seen in their fixation on each other when Yuzu notices Amamiya-sensei making out with Mei. They meet each other when they're in their late teens rather than younger. The series doesn't surprise the audience with it halfway down the line to catch them off guard, and the stepsister aspect is treated as a roadblock to the relationship rather than as a positive. There is a meta aspect where the stepsister aspect adds titillation both narratively and tonally. It's the whole handle/hook of the story. Within the text itself, it's more of a hindrance to the relationship. Despite the sexual tension between Mei and Yuzu, Yuzu interprets her affection for Mei as trying to be a big sister for her, thinking the tension is simply misplaced familial love. Only after Mei acknowledges Yuzu and Ume as her family does Yuzu realize she didn't want to be Mei's sister but her lover. Much of the conflict afterwards and before they start dating derides from this.
She my stepsister, so I guess that's incest.
The Himiko arc is about Yuzu feeling conflicted over acting as a sister to Mei or a lover, since both roles are divergent from one another. The Matsuri arc is about how the confusion about the role of sisters differs from that of lovers. And the school trip arc is how Yuzu uses the cover of Step-Family Ties to deny her feelings. Did Citrus need to be about stepsisters? I mean, I guess not. Nothing has to be about anything specific, but if we're gonna take this question to mean, did the characters, themes, and plot points need that element? Then I don't know how to tell you this, but yes. If you couldn't tell from the theme section, much of Citrus's core ideas and messages come from the conflict and actions of having the main couple of Citrus be stepsisters. And if they just remove that aspect, then there'd be no story, or at least no story anyone would want to read. Sid Field, in his book on screenwriting screenplay, described a story as having two components: the context, i.e. the action or plot of the story, and the content, i.e. the emotional or thematic aspect of the story. He uses the metaphor that the context is a coffee mug and the content is the coffee. The context or plot of a story gives us a handle on the content or emotions of a story. In other words, we like our stories to be about something happening. We need to have a hook or handle to latch onto. After all, when you ask someone to tell you a story, they don't sit there for an hour pontificating about how this story is about good versus evil, the corrupting power of greed, or the inherent apathy of the universe. They say, so there's this guy trying to hunt a white whale, then proceed to recount all the struggles this man went through to resolve this issue, whether successfully or not. Simply put, no stepsister drama, no story in Citrus. Citrus wants to be a story about stepsisters dating and the consequences of it. In Blake Snyder's book on screenwriting Save the Cat, he states that genre is simply selling someone the idea of the same thing, but different. Citrus's premise is a prime example of this. You know those typical schoolgirl Yuri romances? Well, what if the main couple-to-be finds out they're now sisters by marriage? It's an effective premise because it's a simple gimmick that turns what we know about the genre on its head. It's a solid pitch and an easy sell, and it makes it accessible to those interested by the premise, fans of the genre, and those curious. It's so basic that it's surprising it hadn't been done yet, and compared to other popular Yuri, its premise is either easier to summarize and it sounds more interesting. Compare it to the likes of Adachi and Shimomura, Bloom Into You, or Kase-san. It either takes too many sentences to make them sound interesting, or a single sentence summary just isn't interesting enough to the common layman. This isn't an indication of their quality, obviously, but both thematically and in terms of marketing, Citrus's premise is killer. This is not to say aspects of a narrative cannot be critiqued or could be removed for a better experience. One of my favorite Yuri out right now is I'm in Love with the Villainess, but there's a supporting couple that is brother and sister, and I hate its inclusion. It adds nothing thematically, the narrative reason for it could easily be replaced without much rewriting, and it feels off-putting in an unintentional way. Compare that to Revolution Girl Utano, where the incest is thematically necessary to the series. It would require rewriting the whole series to change it, and it's uncomfortable because it's supposed to be uncomfortable. The issue is that critiques of Citrus's stepsister relationship feel so surface level. Had the plot itself been more akin to girlfriend friends Adachin Shimamura or any other schoolgirl Yuri, I could understand the criticism, but to Citrus's credit, its inclusion isn't token. It's not a series about two girls dating who happen to be stepsisters. It's about what would happen if two stepsisters started dating. Any critique of the premise of Citrus feels skin deep as such, where the problem is the subject matter rather than how the subject is handled. So please, if you have criticisms of Citrus tackling incest, have criticism of how it tackles the topic. Let's discuss the bigger elephant in the room, Citrus's depiction of sexual assault and non-consensual elements. Any discussion of such a hot-button topic will be dicey, and I will try to be as tactful and respectful as possible. Citrus's depiction of non-consensual elements is uncomfortable, but they're supposed to be. Mei forcefully kissing Yuzu or actively manipulating her is not portrayed in a positive light. The series never excuses her actions. Mei acknowledges her actions are wrong and even apologizes to Yuzu, such as when Yuzu finally returns home after their confrontation in the chairman's office.
If you're planning to apologize, don't. Because I think I may have pressured you into it as well.
Likewise, Yuzu doesn't excuse Mei's actions either. One of the turning points early in the series is Yuzu berating Mei for manipulating Yuzu after Mei's father comes home. This action is the beginning of Mei changing her actions. The series itself never excuses Mei, it simply explains why. Mei's character is concisely depicted as a survivor of sexual abuse, and we're even shown examples of this with Mei's forceful kiss being a reenactment of Mamma Mia-sensei forcing himself on Mei. As I said in the part on themes, this moment is an overt example of how abuse is a cycle. Mei is abused and thus goes on to abuse someone similarly. This moment seems to be a moment of empowerment for Mei, as Mei continues to use Yuzu as a toy. Yuzu makes Mei feel in control. Mei is depicted as a passive and reactive person. She panics when having to make her own decisions early on in the series.
I want you to make your own decisions. You have to choose how to live your life.
But, Grandfather...
Am I clear?
Yes.
She becomes active and controlling toward Yuzu. Yet, it's not as simple as viewing Yuzu as a stress ball. While she views acts such as sex and kissing as a transaction, when Yuzu declines Mei's offer of a kiss in episode 3, Mei comes off more than just annoyed that her plaything isn't playing along.
This was the easiest way to shut you up. You see.
I see. That you're terrible.
It would seem so.
While what Mei does is not an okay way of doing it, the narrative seems to imply that Mei's actions toward Yuzu are also cries for help, or perhaps her own up way of feeling connected to someone. These aren't excuses for her actions, these are explanations, and it's only after Yuzu refuses to put up with it and Mei herself understands this when she finally gets better.
It's strange. I'm constantly seeking out warmth from other people, because I'm so messed up on my own.
Mei is shown to be between power and powerlessness. While to Yuzu, Mei seems like she has everything under control, in reality she's mostly a welcome mat. While student council president, Mei is at the whims of her grandfather's wishes, Amamiya-sensei's desires, and her father's potential return. In Yuzu, she finds the only person she feels like she has power over due to Yuzu's attraction towards Mei.
Why even do something like that?
Well, the way you were looking at me made it clear you wanted to be touched.
This isn't good. I'm not saying any of this is. My argument is that Mei's actions go beyond sexual assault is sexy, which some people assume to be Citrus's pathos. Instead, in the text itself, we see a damaged young girl display symptoms of sexual abuse and cope with trauma in ways consistent with other survivors of trauma.
I was always so desperate to be loved, just like you are. But I kept my heart locked up tight and pushed everyone away when they tried to get close.
Before I knew it, I was left feeling empty. There are certain pushy people in this world who will love you no matter how much you protest. And if we're lucky enough to meet one of them, then even we can end up happy.
None of her actions are ever excused within the text, they're simply explained. I can't agree with any critique that implies the narrative itself romanticizes or objectifies the more harrowing scenes, because they feel harrowing and uncomfortable. Now, we'll talk a lot about author intent and the limits of it, so while it's possible for something the author intended to be uncomfortable to be interpreted as romanticized and vice versa, author intent is useful in explaining how the author uses elements of the media to attempt to frame something in a specific way. Author intent isn't the be-all end-all of criticism, but it is a helpful way to understand why something does or doesn't work, and how it interacts with other parts of the piece. But these moments never come off as intentionally sexy to me, and I doubt the intent was either with how different they are from the genuinely sensual moments within the same story. If you're going to critique these scenes, I think saying they're romanticized feels at odds with the text itself. I think proper critiques can come from how Saburuta fails to fully frame them as uncomfortable, or doesn't give the audience the tools to assume that. Now, that would be more genuine and nuanced criticism. Some have stated Mei grooms Yuzu, however I'm not sure if I agree with that conclusion. Mei manipulates Yuzu, yes, but Mei's actions seem to be out of desperation. She only does it as acts of retaliation for bringing up uncomfortable topics. Not only does Mei eventually start correcting her behavior because Yuzu sets boundaries and Mei realizes the error in her ways, but when Mei does realize she has started to develop feelings for Yuzu, she quickly changes her attitude and actions towards Yuzu. She tries not to be affectionate with Yuzu and pursue anything with her. While cynical viewers might read this as Mei using reverse psychology to make Yuzu want Mei more, Mei isn't some anime mastermind like Light Yagami or Lelouch v Britannia. She's a 16-year-old girl with emotional problems. Mei only begins acting affectionate with Yuzu again because she's jealous of Yuzu's relationship with Matsuri. Had Mei not seen Matsuri kiss Yuzu, I doubt Mei would have begun to go back on her word. Yes, this is still displaying a level of possessiveness on Mei's part, but baby steps, people. Mei wasn't gonna lose all her toxic traits overnight. Progress is rarely linear. Citrus, especially early on in its life, felt like it belonged to a subset of anime and manga that I'll call dark psychological. These are anime and manga that tell realistic stories, so to speak, usually starring teenagers, and that are about relationships and present sex in an uncomfortable way to the audience. Examples include NTR, Scum's Wish, and School Days. They're series that have their characters do fucked up things that the series doesn't necessarily try to justify, but instead explain why they are the way they are. These types of series seemed popular in the late 2000s and early 2010s. Citrus is compared to NTR a lot, not just here, but in a lot of different kinds of discourse, mostly because they're both Yuri series from the early 2010s, with sexually charged narratives and elements of dark psychological anime and manga. The difference is that Citrus dulls its edges, most notably after the third volume. Most of these series have mixed to polarizing reception. NTR received mostly mixed reviews, School Days is one of the worst anime adaptations of all time, and as we know, Citrus remains polarizing. Scum's Wish is the only one I can think of that is agreed on to be good for the most part. If depictions of non-consensual acts in Citrus bother you and prevent you from watching or reading the series, from possibly enjoying the series, that's fine, that's okay, that's, as the kids say, valid. We don't have to consume media we don't want to. No matter how good, bad, or middling something is, no matter how important, disposable, or novel something is, and no matter how controversial, safe, or problematic something is, we do not have to watch, read, listen, or experience it. And it can be for any reason, from serious ones such as certain elements being triggering to subjective ones such as superhero films or noir TV not being your genre. My issue is when people do engage with how Citrus depicts non-consensual acts, I often don't find criticism beyond its inclusion. Part of me gets it. Too often in media, we see rape and sexual assault thrown in with reckless abandon, usually at the expense of women, just to be, quote, mature or raise the stakes, because, quote, rape is the worst thing that can happen to a woman. And yes, I know rape can happen to anyone, but media has a hard time understanding that, and that's what we're critiquing. Likewise, there is also a bad habit of non-consensual acts being romanticized in media. So many of us are so tired of reading what's supposed to be sexy or romantic, only for it to be creepy and coercive. I think we're so jaded by this that we started to assume its inclusion is purely to be shocking or romantic, which I'm pretty sure is an example of the banality of evil. But art can be about or feature these themes while still being good or respectful or non-romanticized. You can have art that is about these topics, not just features them, but makes them integral to the story. I would never argue Citrus is perfect, nor is its depiction of these elements not free of issues, but I think the criticisms around it are shallow and lacking. Too often they take our jadedness with these themes in media and do only cursory readings of the story's contents. I'd be happy to discuss how Citrus fails in its portrayal of sexual trauma, cycles of abuse, and consent. But too often the discussion feels like, this scene that was supposed to make me uncomfortable made me uncomfortable, so the series is bad. I don't want to keep repeating myself, but the series tells us Mei is an abuse survivor. It tells us her actions are unjustified. And it shows how, after she realizes the error of her ways, and when Yuzu puts her foot down, does Mei begin to change and heal as a person. Flaws in execution aside, acting as if the series is pro-rape is at odds with the text itself. It'd be like saying Revolution Girl Utena is pro-rape or Mobile Suit Gundam is pro-war. Depiction is not equal to promotion. There are a lot of things I think the anime does right as an adaptation. It makes many smart changes, especially early on, that seem like things that the manga would have done if it had a second draft. It's little things such as having characters such as Harumin and Himiko show up before they're properly introduced, moving some exposition to sooner in the story, and Yuzu acknowledging Mei is in her class earlier that feel like things Citrus would have done if it had been workshopped and given another once-over. But I also think the phone confiscation scene in the anime did more damage than the forced kiss. The anime's portrayal of the phone confiscation scene puts the rest of the viewing experience in a suspect light. The forced kiss is uncomfortable, but it's supposed to be. It's Mei reenacting her experience of being forcefully kissed by Amamiya-sensei. It's not sexy or glamorous, and the anime doesn't frame it as such. The anime version of the kiss is more uncomfortable because it's longer, has Mei restraining Yuzu, and we see Yuzu struggle. In the manga, it's shown to be quicker with Mei not holding or restraining Yuzu, rather it's shock that paralyzes Yuzu. I think both versions of the scene acknowledge the uncomfortableness of the content. The problem, however, is that the anime doesn't properly set up the intention of the scene, or rather, the anime does its best to confuse the intention of the scene. The phone confiscation scene is portrayed as too sensual in the anime. It makes the audience assume the series is going for an exploitative and sexy tone, which paints the rest of the episode incorrectly. It mischaracterizes Mei as intrinsically predatory, and it gives audience the wrong expectations of the story it's trying to tell. Having Mei feel up Yuzu to find Yuzu's phone in a way that highlights Yuzu's implied arousal at Mei caressing her ass makes the audience say, okay, this anime is trying to be sexy. What's not helped is the upcoming scene is Yuzu peeking in on Mei and Amamiya-sensei making out. The scene was already meant to be ambiguous in the manga, and it mostly stays like that in the anime. Unfortunately, the central tone of the phone confiscation scene in the anime causes the audience to assume a central tone for this scene as well. This culminates in Mei's forced kiss of Yuzu, as the audience is still led to believe that this is supposed to be sensual and sexy thanks to the phone confiscation scene being so early in the episode, painting audience expectation in such a way. Yet, the anime is still trying to portray the forced kiss as uncomfortable, and instead of creating a sense of dynamic contrast between the sensual tone and the non-consensual act, it creates a confusing scene. The scene as it is isn't making people think, oh, this isn't some Yuri romance, this is a deep psychological story. It's making people think, the anime wants me to think this is hot? A girl molesting her new stepsister? No thanks. The cognitive dissonance of the scene doesn't feel intentional, but unintentional. The forced kiss was supposed to recontextualize the ambiguous scene of Amamiya-sensei and Mei making out as uncomfortable, but instead of adapting Subaru Uta's effective use of hindsight, the anime poorly equips the audience to interpret the story early on. Let's do a close reading of the phone confiscation scene in the manga. Yuzu gets into an argument with the student council about the school's dress code and phone policy. Yuzu hides her phone on her person to prevent it from being taken. Mei, the student council president, comes to handle the situation personally. After Yuzu taunts Mei, Mei hugs Yuzu. One panel implies Mei moves her hand around Yuzu's person, though mostly her upper back. Mei lets go and reveals she has taken Yuzu's phone, and tells her that starting tomorrow you'll follow the rules. We don't know where Mei found Yuzu's phone because the manga doesn't show us where Yuzu hid it. One panel it's in her hand, the next both of Yuzu's hands are on Keio's shoulders as Yuzu tries to make her case. Mei has the phone in her left hand when she confiscates it from Yuzu, and in the panels where Mei is hugging Yuzu, Mei's left hand is close to Yuzu's shoulder where her bag is. So maybe it was supposed to be in there, but the impression the scene is trying to give is that Yuzu's phone wasn't in an obvious place, so it's impressive that Mei was able to find it. The entire scene as a whole is played out as comedy. Yuzu confronts the student council president and thinks she scared her only for Mei to hug her, with Yuzu's facial expression conveying confusion and embarrassment over Mei's methods and her ability to find Yuzu's phone. In the official 7C's translation of the chapter by Catherine Ross, Yuzu refers to it as when she grabbed me, and the onomatopoeia of it is grip. In a fan translation by Yuri Project, Yuzu specifically refers to it as a hug, with the onomatopoeia also translated as hug. The scene is supposed to be a comedic moment where Mei hugs Yuzu out of nowhere and somehow confiscates her phone, leaving Yuzu humbled and embarrassed. Now, any physical touch can be considered non-consensual. Now, while I won't say you should go around hugging people, this moment also serves as Mei's save the cat moment, i.e. it gives us insight into her character. Mei is stoic, no nonsense, but does things in unconventional ways. It establishes her character and foreshadows her troubled way of solving problems. Also, the hug itself is implied to be brief. It's long enough to be awkward, but short enough that Yuzu doesn't realize her phone is taken. In all honesty, it's a nothing of a scene that I wouldn't have remembered if it wasn't for the anime. In the anime, it's just this weird scene where we see Mei feel up Yuzu and grope her ass as the animation goes into slow motion. I'm not sure if it's supposed to be sensual, show Yuzu being aroused, or be sexy for the audience, but all it does is make the audience feel dirty for watching it in a way that doesn't feel intended. It feels more like secondhand embarrassment that causes you to cringe as you watch. It feels at odds with the rest of the series and what happens within the same episode. Mei is weird in the manga before her forced kiss of Yuzu, but it's nothing too drastic. She just comes off as contradictory and stuck up. She's a model student and the school's president, but she's seemingly having an affair with her teacher. The initial hug to get Yuzu's phone in the manga is weird, but it does more to add to this contradiction. She's capable, but there's something off about her. Mei doesn't go mask off until Yuzu taunts Mei about her kiss with Amamiya-sensei, which causes Mei to kiss Yuzu in retaliation. Here's when Mei's toxic behavior towards Yuzu truly starts. But by portraying the phone confiscation scene centrally in the anime, it characterizes Mei as predatory, already asserting bodily dominance over Yuzu before the forced kiss. It makes it seem like Mei simply targeted Yuzu when they first met and preyed upon her. It reframes the phone confiscation scene as the first incident instead of the forced kiss, which misunderstands the situation from the manga. Mei wasn't some predatory lesbian looking for a nice piece of ass to harass. She's a damaged kid who felt backed into a corner by Yuzu and acted out the only way she knew how. This isn't forgiveness or an excuse for her actions, rather I'm saying the anime's portrayal doesn't get Mei, and it makes her harder to invest in as a character. The biggest problem with the anime is Mei. This isn't some smarmy attack on Mei as a character, instead this is an attack on how the anime handles Mei's character. The manga portrays Mei as a repressed kid whose cracks are beginning to show. The anime portrays Mei as someone who's learning to feel for the first time, and I don't mean that in a positive way. You may say that the anime is an adaptation, and this is simply a reinterpretation of that character to better fit in its context. Those are all good points when discussing adaptation, but I get the feeling either the interpretation of Mei portrayed by the anime wasn't intentional, or if it was, they didn't commit enough to it. Why? Because the story itself contradicts this interpretation. We see Mei as a kid, a cute, expressive little kid who feels a range of emotions. The anime's depiction of Mei hampers the entire adaptation. Mei is just hard to like or sympathize with in the anime, or at least she's much harder to like or sympathize with in the anime. One reason is that while the anime is very pretty and captures the art of the manga quite well, it seems like the studio was afraid of depicting anything off-model, especially Mei, so Mei comes off as completely monotone visually. Mei rarely breaks the default expression in the anime. When she does, it's more downplayed than the original manga. And that's the thing, Mei in the manga is much easier to like or sympathize with. Why? Because she's far more expressive. Yeah, she is mostly stern and serious, but when the crack shows, the dynamic contrast speaks volumes. What also helps is that the two things Sabaru Uta are best at drawing are hair and facial expressions. A panel is a photograph, a single moment in time captured. When we see Mei's defenses falter, even if only for a second, Yuzu, and by proxy us, is seeing a side of Mei she hides from everyone else. Beneath the high-strung, stern, emotionally unstable Yamato Nakadashi is just another girl, just another human, who doesn't feel safe around anyone else. And this is lost in the anime when they downplay Mei's more expressive moments, or just straight up don't include them. I think the anime is a, say it with me now, problematic adaptation of the source material. Is the anime god-awful? No, I wouldn't say that. After all, I got into the manga because of the anime. I liked the anime after watching it, but I think it helped in defining Citrus's reputation for general audiences. The poor characterization of Mei and confusing changes did nothing but prove previous critics right that Citrus was nothing more than fetish material that romanticized incest and sexual assault. Also, what doesn't help is that the anime adapted the weakest section of the manga. That part is nobody's fault, as what else can you do? But it was more weight on the camel's already strained back. My final opinions of the anime are hard to articulate. It's weaker than the manga, it covers the part of the manga I reread the least, and it makes some poor changes to the manga, yet I can't hate it. Part of it is the sense of warmth for getting me into the series, and the other part is that as a Yuri anime, it fills a much needed hole. Citrus is surprisingly one of the most satisfying Yuri anime. Why? Because it ends with our main couple getting together and having intimate moments. No subtext, no off-screen kissing, no teasing. Two girls hold hands, kiss, and date each other. Less polarizing anime such as Bloom Into You and Adachi Shimamura don't give us that. Both series are fantastic, I'll never argue they aren't, but they can leave an audience feeling unsatisfied. Bloom Into You is a well-directed and beautifully animated 13-episode commercial for the manga, and its ending feels more like a season finale than a series finale, something I dub Princess Jellyfish Syndrome. Adachi and Shimamura fares better because it's a subtler, more devils in the details series, so it's more successful in creating big waves with small motions. Citrus fills a niche many Yuri don't get a chance to fill. The only other examples I can think of that fill this niche are the 60-minute OVA Kase-san and Morning Glories, which is intimate and tender, but is limited to being a single OVA, and structurally feels like 4 15-minute episodes stitched together. Strawberry Panic, still probably my favorite romance anime as a romance, Sakura Trick, which suffers from an overly comedic tone at times, and Kashimashi Girl Meets Girl, if anyone still remembers this series. If you can accept Citrus's barrier of entry, it will be one of the most satisfying Yuri anime out right now, partly because it's rare to see an ending where the main couple end up together, or are an official couple who are physically intimate with one another. There's a form of bad faith criticism that places too much emphasis on the author over the art, especially in Yuri. Namely, the belief that anything written by men is inherently inaccurate to the lesbian experience, and anything written by women is inherently more truthful to it. This also extends to the demographic as well, i.e. Yuri written for a male audience is bad, while Yuri written for a female audience is good. This is a poor way to critique any form of art, however. Of the many criticisms thrown at Citrus, I find the most baffling and dangerous to be that Citrus is bad because it was made for men. I've even seen some say Citrus is bad because it was made by a man. To our knowledge, due to the private nature of mangaka, Subaruto is a woman. But even if she wasn't, any of these criticisms are poor in bad faith. Citrus isn't made for men, and even if it was, that's not enough to condemn it. Even beyond Citrus, this type of criticism doesn't simply separate art from the artists, it forgoes the art entirely and focuses solely on the artist. Casual anime and manga fans come into Yuri, such as Citrus, with the assumption that it is the inverse of boys love, or BL for short, known informally as yaoi. BL is a genre of Japanese media about the intimate relationship between male characters, and it usually targets a female audience. As such, people with little exposure to Yuri see it as BL's opposite, lesbian media made for men. If you couldn't tell from our crash course on Class S, this isn't true. Yuri has its origins in girls' literature, shoujo manga, and a proto-feminist movement. The truth is, Yuri's demographic is complex. It doesn't target a single demographic. According to Nikki Bauman, as of 2017, the largest Yuri manga publication, Kamikuri Hime, boasts a readership consisting of approximately 60% men and 50% women. Likewise, Dr. Verena Macer, a German translator for several anime and manga, including Citrus, coincidentally, surveyed Japanese Yuri readers and found that among 1,352 respondents, 52.4% identified as female, 46.1% were male, and 1.6% were other. And of the 695 English language respondents for a 2017 survey by Yuri blogger Zuria, 47.2% were female, 44.32% were male, and 8.5% were non-binary or other. Friedman perfectly summarizes my point when she writes, "So if BL is for women, GL is for guys, right?" And here is where Yuri is and always has been the dark horse, the redheaded stepchild of manga. Because the answer is no, not really. Yuri is for anyone who enjoys Yuri. But even if Yuri generally isn't for a specific audience, what about Citrus specifically? There are Yuri that have been published in demographic magazines. Well, Citrus was published in the genre magazine Kamikuri Hime, which doesn't have a demographic. It used to. When it first debuted, it was a shoujo/josei magazine, with a shonen/seinen sister magazine, Kamikuri Hime S. But Citrus began publishing in 2012, after two were merged in 2011, thus turning solely into a genre magazine without a demographic. And most of Sabaru Uta's background is in shoujo/josei manga. She states her trigger for why she wanted to draw characters was Sailor Moon. Likewise, she name dropped mostly shoujo/josei manga as influences, such as Cardcaptor Sakura, X, Aqua, Fushigi Yugi, and 1001 Nights. Now, a mangaka can be influenced by other genres or demographics they don't belong to. Kentaro Miura, mangaka of Berserk, famously said that he was influenced by shoujo and josei manga, but Miura still acknowledged he was making a seinen manga. Both Sabaru Uta herself and critic Rebecca Silverman acknowledged Sabaru Uta's past as a shoujo mangaka. So is Citrus a shoujo manga? I'm not going to argue that. Sabaru Uta never calls it a shoujo manga. Instead, I'm going to argue that Citrus isn't shoujo, shonen, josei, or seinen. It's just a Yuri manga. And Yuri is for everyone. Besides, even if we take the criticisms that Citrus is bad because it's made for men at face value, this would mean any respected and beloved Yuri series would also be automatically bad as a result, including Adachi and Shimomura, After Hours, Bloom Into You, Girlfriends, Gunjo, A Kiss in White Lily for My Dearest Girl, Hana and Hina After School, Qualia the Purple, Sakura Trick, Strawberry Panic, A Tropical Assurance for Snow, Whispered Words, Yuri Yuri, and I could keep going. Whether you like each of these series or not, simply condemning them because they are made for a male demographic goes beyond engaging with the work critically, it's engaging with everything but the work. Yes, I understand that for some, the issue with Citrus isn't that it's literally made for men, nor that it feels like it is, and if that's the case, can we be more articulate than saying made for men? Because what does that mean exactly? And in what ways is that bad? Implying there's something intrinsic about being made for men is gender essentialism masquerading as feminist critique. Even if we were to legitimize this parody of identity politics and take lesbian media being made for men as intrinsically bad, wouldn't that mean lesbian media made by lesbian artists is inherently better and more authentic than those made by men or straight women? If so, then the likes of Citrus and NTR would be inherently better and more authentic to the lesbian experience than the likes of After Hours, Adachi and Shimomura, and Revolution Girl Utena. After all, both Sabaru Uta and Kodama Naoko have explicitly stated having been attracted to other women at one point or another. And the mangaka behind After Hours is a man, the writer of Adaptation Shimomura is a man, and while Revolution Girl Utano was a group effort, the anime was directed by Kuniko Ikuhara and written by Yoji Enokido, 2 men. Again, engaging with media like this goes beyond engaging with the work critically, it's engaging with everything but the work. Yet, After Hours, Adaptation Shimomura, and Revolution Girl Utano are some of the most respected and respectful Yuri series, despite being created mostly by men. Also, the writer of Adaptation Shimomura wrote the Blue Minty spin-off regarding Psyche Sayaka, which some regard as even better than its source material. And this is the case, perhaps it's possible for Yuri made by men to be good. And in the cases of After Hours, Adaptation Shimomura, and regarding Psyche Sayaka, Yuri made for a male demographic can also be good. Likewise, some of the most sensual and erotic Yuri ever made has been done by female and WLW mangaka. Citrus, NTR, Hanjuku Joshi, Girlfriends, and many others. Frieden writes, anyone can be a Yuri creator. Creators of all genders and sexualities have been instrumental in laying out the literary and artistic pathways along which Yuri developed. Unlike other manga genres, Yuri is not dependent on the target audience for definition. Yuri is, quite literally, different from every other genre in that its target audience is anyone who enjoys it. So maybe as a whole, the demographic or identity of the creator isn't indicative of a certain Yuri's quality. Fundamentally, Yuri has no target demographic. Even when it is a specific demographic, Yuri, especially contemporary Yuri, is not dependent on the target audience for definition. By its boundary-crossing nature, Yuri is a mirror in which our desires are reflected back onto us. Friedman, Sabaru Uta, and fellow Yuri mangaka Kodama Naoko acknowledge how much Yuri is taken from all genres and demographics, and that it is an extremely wide genre with a bunch of themes within it. Friedman articulates this when they write, Yuri moved into each of these demographics/genres. It took on some of those tropes. The boyish hottie from shoujo, the sexy femme fatale from shonen, the young professional woman from josei, the badass from seinen, and the hyper cute girl from all of them. Yuri now includes all these things side by side. Even specifically about Comic Yuri Hime, Bauman writes that it features a mixture of works, some of which are akin to josei, such as female author Usawa Yaoyoi's 2DK G-Pen Mezamashi Tokai, a tame slow burn romance, while others are closer to seinen or shonen, like Murray Hachi's lewd and fast-paced comedy Love to Lie Angel. However, the magazine does not label or advertise itself, nor any of the works contained within it, to gender demographics. Another example is when the now defunct online manga distributor J-Manga listed Yuri as a separate genre from shonen, shoujo, josei, seinen, and BL. Yuri is no longer associated with a specific demographic, one set of tropes, and a single audience. It stands on its own with its own style and messages. To quote Friedman, Yuri is the very first genre that belongs to everyone. Also, assigning too much value to a demographic based on the assumption there are only 2 genders is flawed in its own right. After all, gender isn't a stable concept, and this isn't even getting into how closeted queer and trans folk use the private nature of experience art and entertainment targeted towards the opposite gender they are assigned at birth, and about queer characters to explore and experiment with their own identity. A guy reading Yuri today might not be a guy tomorrow, and that straight girl reading BL may have a girlfriend in the future. It's not our place to judge. Like Yuri as a whole, Citrus is influenced by a variety of genres and demographics, and I think this causes people to wrongly think Citrus exists solely for men. Much of Citrus's sexual nature appears to come from Sabaru Uta being influenced by shoujo and teens love, or TL. TL is a genre of erotic media in Japan created by and marketed towards women. According to an interview with Sabaru Uta, she said she had written shoujo and TL before Citrus and it influenced its creation. For many of the sensual scenes in Citrus, Sabaru Uta said she uses men's erotica and H doujinshi as references. She said, "There's no favoritism. I learned how to break down scenes and how to express the tender body of a girl in order to give it strong appeal. Yet many of the unsavory elements of Citrus feel more influenced by female-targeted media." In their video on Citrus, Zuria says, "Citrus uses sexual assault like a trashy 90s shoujo or BL romance. And incest isn't uncommon to shoujo, even the popular and famous ones. Such examples include Angel Sanctuary, brother-sister, Ani Emo, step-siblings, brothers conflict, step-siblings, Cardcaptor Sakura, first cousins and second cousins, dear brother, half-siblings, Fruits Basket, the whole Soma clan thing is sus, Magic Knight Rareth, self-cest, My Next Life as a Villainess, step-siblings, or on High School Host Club, twincest, Revolution Girl Utena, multiple, and Vampire Knight, oh god, don't get me started." This is not a criticism of shoujo on the whole, rather I'm saying girls manga isn't pure either, so to act as though the incest or non-consensual elements of Citrus couldn't possibly exist in media made for girls is ridiculous. The male gaze is an academic term that's been popular in non-academic settings, and like many other useful terms, this has done damage to its purpose. I'm reminded of how theory in The Natural Scientist means a tried and true fact, while in casual English it's used to mean hypothesis. I also think about how people are starting to use therapy terms in regular conversation, and instead of using said terms to fix themselves, they use them to excuse themselves from criticism. And I'm reminded of the Bechdel test, the fabled test that asks whether a work features at least two women who talk to each other about something other than a man. This one is also tragically misused by the public. The test was mainly meant for film, and it was never meant to simply test if a film was feminist. It was a joke meant to be the bare minimum for testing female relationships within a film. I'm not gonna lie here, the male gaze is far more complicated than how most people talk about it, so I'm not gonna pretend to be an expert. Instead, I'm going to turn to the experts for this. In Martin Thieren's review of the Citrus anime for Anime News Network, he wrote, while the series does have a fair amount of fan service overall, it's still relatively tame compared to fan service focused series, with shots more commonly used to emphasize the atmosphere of a sexual situation instead of purely titillating shots. Even in reviews by those critical of Citrus, the criticism of male gaze really comes up. For example, while Zuria still believes there are many more ways to be creepy with a lesbian work than aiming it at straight men, and Citrus executes on many of those, they say, I don't find Sabaruto's work to be partially male-gazy. This is a bit different for the anime, as the director is a man, but seeing as it's a pretty straight adaptation, I think the effect of that on the sexualization of the characters in Assault is fairly minor. Certainly, the Assault here is not drawn solely to allow straight men to get off to it. Likewise, neither Friedman's review of the anime nor Okazu contributor Day's review of the manga criticized the series for appealing to the male gaze. Instead, they have other things to criticize. And speaking candidly as an anime fan, I've seen fan service in shows and fan service centric shows. Compared to those, Citrus is far less exploitative, shameless, and explicit. But again, I'm not an expert on what the male gaze is. I can't help but think one of the reasons people assume Citrus is made for men is for its sensual elements. There's a notion among queer women and AFAB folk that female-bodied folk are inherently less sexual or pure than men/AMAB folk. This is, of course, bullshit. It's simply purity rhetoric rephrased for queer women and AFAB folk. It's respectability politics for women. Fundamentally, it's repackaged gender essentialism meant to sound nice and logical, but underneath, it's rhetoric to exclude and target women who don't fall into this narrow view of womanhood. Trans femmes and women, butch and masculine women, AMAB women adjacent folk, women of color, and those who are happy to have a high libido can easily be viewed as fake women or dangerous to the movement and community. Especially if we medicalize this lie by explaining it away with hormones or legitimize it by misrepresenting socialization theory. It's okay for women, all women, to want to have sex. They aren't less pure, less feminine, or less of a woman. Anti-sexuality and sex negativity aren't inherently anti-male gaze or anti-patriarchy, and believing so speaks to a Puritan and queer pessimistic attitude that goes deeper than this video. Views like this can be easily hijacked by TERFs and gender criticals and have you hate your comrades for not fitting into an exact definition of womanhood. You know, the same thing the patriarchy also does to women. And if you're gonna say it's not that Citrus is sexual, but that it fetishizes the lesbian experience because of its depiction of incest and non-consensual elements, again, I implore you to realize that Citrus is not trying to romanticize sexual assault. Within the text itself, it renounces said actions. And I've discussed how Citrus uses incest enough for it to be its own video that it simply isn't to be fetishistic. I think it's also important to place Citrus and other sexually charged Yuri series of the time, such as NTR, in the context of the genre itself. Yuri during the 2000s was extremely chaste and pure. Remember, the biggest and most influential Yuri of the time was Maria Watches Over Us, a neo-Class S narrative that resurrected many Class S tropes. And a lot of the series at the time were either heavily inspired by it or tried to piggyback off its success. While there were exceptions, such as Hanjuku Joshi and Girlfriends, 2000s Yuri was often puritanical in its depictions of same-sex relationships. It's hard not to see series such as Citrus and NTR as reactions to this in their unabashed sexualness. Critics will say they overcorrected, but to reach a synthesis, we need a thesis and antithesis. We can't simply skip steps here. And yes, I am alluding to Hegel in a video about a manga where stepsisters kiss. You're so smart for picking up on that, I'm so proud of you. The overemphasis on the identity of a creator is a parody of identity politics. It's becoming what conservatives think identity politics is. The context of art and media is important. Art is neither experienced nor created in a vacuum, but focusing too much on the artist over the art isn't just separating art from artist, it removes art from the equation. And in the case of Citrus, this isn't even about an artist who is a bad person. Subaru Uta is a normal Japanese citizen. Instead, we're focusing too much on if Subaru Uta's identity makes Citrus an authentic expression of lesbianism. Many have said no, and many have said yes to Citrus feeling authentic. So it doesn't matter whether Subaru Uta is a woman or gay for people to think the narrative is authentic, because from what we know about Subaru Uta, she is a woman who has expressed attraction to women. So by the logic of overemphasizing the identity of the artists, Citrus must be authentic, and if you disagree, you're wrong. Am I saying that? No. Just because someone is trans or gay doesn't mean I always agree with how they portray gay or trans people, but basing authenticity solely on the author's identity removes that conversation from the itinerary. While the author themselves can have an impact on how you read a text, it shouldn't define the text because authors are not their work. A more dangerous view is assuming that because you disagree or dislike a person's depiction of their community or identity, they must not truly be part of it or one of them. If you dislike Citrus, don't assume it's because Sabaruta is a man or not sapphic. Maybe you just don't like Citrus as a piece of art. Besides, there's little divide between Yuri by different genders now. In a joint interview with Kodama Naoko and Sabaru Uta, both Yuri mangaka talk about changes in Yuri manga. Naoko says, recently there isn't much of a fence. There's time if the story has a pattern similar to shoujo manga, I think maybe the author is female, but I can't tell the difference. Sabaruta said Yuri had felt segregated. Some were the taste of shoujo manga when a woman writes Yuri, and that of shonen manga when a man writes Yuri drifts into the story, but the line between the two became thin and blended together. As is a theme in this section, the divide between Yuri for boys and girls and Yuri by boys and girls has become blurred, with only extreme examples in series published in non-genre magazines having any definitive demographic. And this is still a limited way to view the genre, as more than just boys and girls as creators and fans exist. Coming back to the idea that one needs to be a lesbian to produce an authentic lesbian experience, I find that a poor view, especially when applied to art as a whole. Maybe it's because I'm a writer, but being told you can only write about a few specific things feels anti-creativity. By this logic, lesbians can only write about lesbians, white people can only write about white people, Jewish people can only write about Jewish people, and a post office worker can only write about post office workers. Okay, that last one's a joke. We all know a job isn't an identity. Hashtag no such thing as blue lives. I understand there are fears of telling someone else's story and perhaps speaking over them, i.e. a straight man writing about lesbians that gets critical acclaim, while a lesbian writing about lesbians is ignored and maligned. There's also a fear of cultural appropriation rather than cultural exchange. These are all serious issues, but the real issue is the system in which we live, where privileged voices are elevated regardless of quality, while marginalized voices are buried. But the notion that people can't write outside their experiences or perspectives is another issue entirely. Saying something like that isn't radical, it's repackaged essentialist values. That's saying there's something specific about queer folk, people of color, disabled people, etc. that makes them inherently different from cis-het, white, able-bodied people, etc. that cannot be understood or isn't worth understanding. Likewise, why is it that people of marginalized groups can write about non-marginalized groups without much of a fuss? I'm not trying to argue that the people on top are the truly oppressed people. Rather, I think this radical gatekeeping of identity benefits the people on top more than anything. The system is what elevates privileged voices and buries marginalized ones. I'm not campaigning for the white savior who needs to be the privileged voice of the downtrodden. Instead, I'm saying we're targeting the wrong issue in the wrong way. We're assuming a concrete, systemic problem to be metaphysical and trying to solve it as such. But even speaking purely metaphysically, the idea that someone can't write about or from the perspective of someone outside themselves is bullshit. It limits imagination and empathy, which are keys to the human experience. Famed book critic and anti-Stalin Stan account Leon Trotsky wrote in his influential book on literary theory, Literature and Revolution, the truth is that even if individuality is unique, it does not mean that it cannot be analyzed. Individuality is a welding together of tribal, national, class, temporary, and institutional elements, and, in fact, it is in the uniqueness of this welding together, in the proportions of this psychochemical mixture, that individuality is expressed. He goes on to say that this uniqueness can be analyzed because, despite the number of differences, humans always have commonalities. So it can be seen as what serves as a bridge from soul to soul is not the unique, but the common. Only through the common is the unique known. The common is determined in man by the deepest and most consistent conditions that make up his soul, by social conditions of education, of existence, of work, and of associations. To say people of differences can never understand each other is to imply there must be no commonalities. This thought process can easily fall back into essentialism. It's not hard to go from this to say men and women are inherently oppositional, or there's something biologically different between white people and black people. In his groundbreaking book on the psychology of colonization, Black Skin, White Masks, Frantz Fanon said, "I sincerely believe a subjective experience can be understood by all. I did not want to be objective. Besides, that would be dishonest. I found it impossible to be objective." Trying too hard to tell an objective story of one group or identity is fruitless because all our experiences are so different. You'd either have to be so broad it becomes nothing but generalities, or so specific it isn't simply a story about, say, a lesbian, but a Jewish lesbian in Chicago, or an Ethiopian lesbian working in the hospital, or a non-binary lesbian living in Chile. Speaking candidly, I have read many works about trans and or queer characters that felt authentic, despite the author or creative not being trans or lesbian to my knowledge. We'll get to that. Some examples include Laura and the titular Carmela from Carmela by Sheridan Le Fanu, Josh from Holding Still as Long as Possible by Zoe Whittle, Dr. Matthew O'Connor from Nightwood by Juna Barnes, the titular Orlando from Orlando by Virginia Woolf, Haruka and Michiru from Sailor Moon, Marika from Bokuro no Hentai, and Lily from Zombieland Saga. But that's even when we know that much about an author. The truth is, we aren't always going to know everything about an artist before engaging with a work. And this is especially true of manga, as mangaka are usually a very private profession. You have a few superstars, but even the famous ones have a level of privacy we don't often see in the West. Most mangaka are private and want to keep it that way. It's not uncommon for mangaka meetups to ban photos, for example. There's also the language barrier when it comes to mangaka. Unless they have a dedicated fan base or are Eiichiro Oda famous, we're probably not going to see or read a majority of the interviews or the information about them out there because it's hard to find and in Japanese. So we're probably not going to know about their gender, sexuality, or even basic biographical information. And an artist doesn't owe us any of that. Yes, I love when marginalized groups, especially ones I'm a part of, have more visibility. I'm grateful for all the queer and trans women who have chosen to be visible and open about their lives as queer and trans women. But not everyone has to do that. And too often we fall into the heteronormative trap that because someone doesn't come out publicly as lesbian, gay, bi, trans, queer, etc., they are cishet by default, which is exactly what cis heteronormativity wants us to think. This can get embarrassing, like when a vocal minority called out the author of Simon vs. the Homo Sapiens Agenda, which was adapted into the film Love, Simon, Becky Albertalli, for writing about queer characters, assuming her to be cishet, only for Albertalli to come out as bisexual. While she stated that her coming out was not an attempt to neutralize criticism of her books, she asked her critics to acknowledge that carelessness in these discussions has caused real harm. Artists don't owe you their life stories or invasions of their privacy. They are people whom you pay for their art. The intended audience isn't indicative of work's actual audience or full audience. There are many examples. In 1973, manga legend Go Nagai created Cutie Honey, an ecchi shonen magical girl manga. It was intended for a male audience with an emphasis on action, fan service, and crude humor. It grew such a huge female following, however, that it eventually spawned a female-oriented spin-off manga and anime, Cutie Honey Flash, published in the renowned shoujo magazine Chow, and aired during Sailor Moon Sailor Star's time slot after that finished, respectively. Likewise, while the original Mobile Suit Gundam was intended for a male demographic, series creator Yoshiyuki Tamino has acknowledged that the true fans of Gundam in its early days were the girls and women who watched it, as the majority of the male fanbase came from Gunpla, and the women came from the anime. The girls and women tended to be BL fans, or Fujoshi, and were deeply invested in the relationship between comrades Char Aznavour and Gar Mizabi, and later the rivalry between leads Amuro Ray and Char Aznavour. Tamino believed it was these fans who truly understood Gundam, as they were invested in the characters, themes, and story of the franchise rather than the robots. If you haven't seen the film The Producers, or its Broadway musical adaptation, or the film adaptation of the Broadway musical adaptation, it's about a duo of Broadway producers who attempt a money laundering scheme by producing the worst musical ever, so it will close early and they can pocket the cash. To do this, they produce a musical written by a neo-Nazi called Springtime for Hitler. Instead of being an offensive failure, however, the audience interprets the musical as a dark comedy, and it becomes a critical and commercial hit. Why am I bringing this up? Because the author's intentions, while important, doesn't ultimately matter. Fundamentally, all works are orphans, and we can only engage with them as such. You can hate Citrus, you can criticize it, you can trash it, but arguing its quality based on if it's made for men or for women, or if it's made by a straight or queer woman, is bad faith criticism. You say it's made for men, what does that mean? You say it's made by a man, or feels like it was made by a man, what does that mean? Because I'm not hearing real or good faith criticisms, because plenty of Yuri by and for men are not just good, but loved within the anime, manga, and Yuri community. It's lazy criticism, and it's dangerous criticism, because it places emphasis on the artist over the art, and it promotes gender essentialism and cis heteronormativity. Any criticism like this feels less like feminist, queer, or progressive critique, and more like a parody of what those words mean. To put it bluntly, criticism like this feels like what a person who hates feminism, queer theory, or progressivism would make to make such things look dumb. It's all embarrassingly lacking in nuance.
If you're taking, I'm yours, I've been doing circles, I'm taking, I'm yours, I've been doing circles, I'm taking, I'm yours, I've been doing circles, I'm taking, I'm yours, I've been doing circles. I collapse, I might stay out longer than I left a light on for you then. If you show, you show, if you show, you show.
The reason I don't consider this video a defense of Citrus is that there are many valid criticisms out there. My issue is that I'm tired of engaging with the same skin-deep takes on incest or non-consensual elements, which sounds awful now that I say it out loud, but you know what I mean. For the love of God, please. It all reeks of people who read or watched the first couple of chapters or episodes, then dropped it and continued to complain about it for years to come. I don't want no criticism, I just want better criticism. If you dislike the writing, characters, pacing, themes, depictions of incest, non-consensual elements, etc., that's great. I'd love to hear it. This video is never meant to squash all criticism. I'm trying to open more avenues for nuanced criticism that engages with the work. Now that I've discussed the common criticisms of Citrus that feel undeserved or underbaked, what are my criticisms of the series? After all, I said the series wasn't perfect, and I have criticisms for all imperfect series, even without the controversial baggage of Citrus. As much as I've defended Citrus's right to depict non-consensual elements and to be about sexual abuse, the series feels ashamed of this as it goes on. While I like how tender and downplayed the sensual elements are as the series goes on, as it contrasts how different Mei and Yuzu's relationship was in the beginning, I wish there was some kind of reckoning between Mei and Yuzu. I'm not asking for Mei and Yuzu to have a chapter or arc dedicated to therapy talk, but I do want some kind of confrontation between the two. It all feels too clean to the point where you could say Mei's toxic behaviors are swept under the rug. I'm not asking for Mei to give us her life story and an itemized list of her trauma, but some more overt acknowledgement from either character would be nice. It doesn't have to be direct, but something that acknowledges it, you know? It makes the latter part of the series feel disconnected from the former, and it makes the series feel ashamed of its early parts. Which would be fine, sometimes it takes a while to get beyond the peach fuzz, but when your early chapters are about sexual abuse such as Citrus, it gives the series a rocky foundation. I appreciate subtlety, but I feel like we need some sort of acknowledgement of this era of Citrus because it feels like it's being deliberately kept quiet rather than integrated further into the narrative. Are you just ashamed of it? Listen, I get it. It was what gave the series a lot of controversy, but I defended it because it felt like it was deliberately trying to tackle themes of cycles of abuse and sexual trauma. And while it's still there throughout the rest of the story, it feels like we can't just skip over this part of the narrative. I just want some sort of instance of Yuzu saying, hey, let's talk about this, or Mei saying, there's something I want to get off my chest. Maybe most people are glad we moved past it, and I am too in a sense, but I still want it to be acknowledged. A series should have a through line rather than a cavalcade of random events. I just think it would make the series stronger and make it feel more deliberate rather than thrown in for shock or to be edgy. And I know I said it felt like it was added deliberately, but the lack of acknowledgement makes it feel like Saburo Uta wants to distance the series from it, which in the case of Citrus, I think is the wrong thing to do. The lack of reckoning or acknowledgement of Mei's early sexual abuse also makes Citrus seem like it's placing more of the blame on Mei's actions on the absence of her father. It makes it easy for many people to write off Citrus's portrayal of Mei as just another mentally unstable lesbian due to the neglect of her father that so many Yuri seem to have. Even with the acknowledgement of Mei's behavior being the result of abuse rather than quote-unquote neglect, it still doesn't prevent her from being part of that trope. Hell, as much as I've praised Citrus for tackling Class S tropes and stereotypes, the fact that most of the main cast have missing or absent fathers does create an uncomfortable subtext about the neglect of fathers being tied to these characters being lesbians. I don't think this was the intent. Rather, it's a trope so big to the genre that it's become like air to us. We often forget it's there. I wouldn't bring it up because I don't think a lack of showing father characters in Yuri equates to agreeing with or portraying Freud's incorrect hypothesis on the origin of lesbians, but the fact that Mei's character so heavily evokes it can be projected onto the rest of Citrus. Yuzu's father has passed, we don't see either of Harumin's parents, and both of Matsuri's parents are always busy. I'm not saying this is bad or unrealistic, just that it can be seen as an old bad habit of Yuri. This can be a problem with menless Yuri in general, I find. While on one hand I see the appeal, with the amount of media that forgets women exist, it's nice to have media solely about them. But in the context and shadow of Class S, the lack of men can be read as the reason for lesbians as opposed to separate or despite that. A sole female cast is cool, don't get me wrong, but when applied sloppily it can be a galvanization of old tropes instead of subversions. By the way, this isn't a demand for men in Yuri on principle or anything, just something to keep in mind. Now, I don't think Citrus is trying to make Freud proud, and I've already said I think it does acknowledge Mei's behavior being not solely the fault of the father, but it's something lost as the series goes on and forgets its roots, and the fact that characters themselves emphasize Sho's absence makes the blame feel uneven. I appreciate that some things are left better unsaid, but as the series progresses, the lack of any verbal acknowledgement makes it feel forgotten within the narrative itself. Something to even the blame and remind us that it was more than just daddy issues. As much as I praise Citrus for going beyond other Yuri with how it wants to handle homophobia and features uncommon elements to Yuri such as coming out, the only time we ever see the word lesbian in any way is when Matsuri refers to Yuzu as a lesbo in a derogatory way, at least in the official translation of the manga. Even a character as open about their sexuality as Sarah never refers to herself as bisexual, pansexual, or demisexual. Yeah, people don't have to label themselves, but considering how Citrus features scenes on homophobia and coming out, it feels like a weird boundary not to cross. Maybe I've been spoiled by newer series such as I'm in Love with the Villainess and She Loves to Cook and She Loves to Eat, but I think Citrus and its sequel Citrus Plus could have crossed that line. It feels like a lack of commitment to the lesbian identity. I know I've praised other elements of Citrus, but it feels like it stopped short of true greatness in this regard. It just feels like the job's half finished, you know? Like, you're gonna critique all the issues with Class S, but not go the extra step and go beyond being lesbian media without lesbian identity. Maybe I'm asking too much and not appreciating what they gave us, but it's because I think Citrus is capable of doing more. I say this especially after the episode of I'm in Love with the Villainess aired, where the characters actively discuss sexual identity.
Ray, tell me, am I correct in assuming that you're what they call gay?
Seeing anime fans who actively consume Yuri media become extremely bigoted over seeing characters talk openly about their sexuality and sexual identity shows that despite showing characters on screen who like the same gender, there's still a lot of deeply rooted homophobia in people who consume quote-unquote gay media. So yeah, I do think it's somewhat of a blind spot for Citrus to not do the same, especially with what it was able to accomplish. And also seeing how that episode of I'm in Love with the Villainess really resonated with a lot of gay people who consumed anime, because they don't often see characters actively discuss their sexuality.
I wouldn't say gender doesn't matter at all.
Oh, then it does?
Yeah. I get the logic behind saying gender doesn't matter when you deeply connect with someone. Like, love is love. But I can say for sure that I'll never have those kinds of feelings for a man.
It's a rarity in Yuri despite it being quote-unquote gay media, which is why it's so important when series do it. And that's not even getting into how the final arc feels rushed and really another arranged marriage Sabaru Uta. We can keep going, but you get the picture. Criticizing Citrus isn't hard, even as a fan. Maybe it sounds weird to ask people to engage with works they don't like to properly criticize them, but most professional critics have to do that. You can choose to put a book, movie, or TV show down if you please, but your opinion isn't a review or formal criticism. It's only a take, an impression, a reaction, nothing more. So, despite everything, why can't I hate Citrus? Worse, why do I still like it? There are a lot of reasons. On a surface level, the art is so goddamn good. By the third waymark through the series, Sabaru Uta's art is spectacular. Seriously, it's so good that I wish there was official Citrus apparel, because their designs just look great. They make wonderful reaction images and aesthetic posts. If you've seen this meme around, yeah, that's from Citrus. The drama TM is also engaging. It's what kept me watching despite the uncomfortableness of the early parts. It was nice to watch a Yuri anime that was a drama instead of a comedy like Sakura Trick or a slice of life like Strawberry Marshmallow. It's melodramatic, especially early on, but its ridiculousness was entertaining. I wanted to keep watching, and when it kept throwing plot elements such as Mei's dad who's been gone for 5 years randomly coming back home, Mei's grandfather having a heart attack just as Yuzu sneaks back into the school after being expelled, or Matsuri selling fake nudes for money, I was hooked. It also doesn't help that I found clips of Yuri on YouTube when I was a freshman in high school, so I was predisposed to thinking of incest as hilarious. Going deeper, to Sabaru Uta's credit, she is good at constructing characters. Yuzu is instantly likable, and her interactions with the polar opposite Mei are an interesting conflict. Harumin is easily the best character in the series. She's funny and supportive, but has enough depth to make her more than just a positive influence on Yuzu's life. While Matsuri is initially unlikable when you meet her, her development from Volume 3 to Volume 10 is incredible. It's a prime example of the writing tip that the lower your character starts, the higher they can end up. And even the characters that don't show up that often, such as Ume and Sho, are well defined as people. Characters such as Nene and Shirpan add wacky fun to the series, and even Yuzu's friends who show up twice in the series proper, not including the wedding, leave a lasting impression. As a writer, characters are Sabaru Uta's strong point. Sabaru Uta isn't a poor writer either, she's capable of some great writing and integrating interesting themes. I will say Sabaru Uta's writing can be inconsistent. Most of the time it ranges from okay to good, albeit tropey. But when there are great moments, they're great moments. I think volumes 6 and 8 are when her writing peaks in the series. The Ring arc has some of the most tender and heart-wrenching moments in the series, and the Summer Vacation arc has her juggle an ensemble cast gracefully while layering narrative tension and character development on top. Of course, we have Mei and Yuzu, but we also have Matsuri, Himiko, and Utagawa and their developments and agendas. And chapter 36 is one of the most heartbreaking chapters I've ever read in manga. I usually had like a page of notes for each chapter when rereading for this video, but all I had for chapter 36 was just a frowny face. The chapter has minimal dialogue because it's the contents of Mei's breakup letter to Yuzu over shots of Yuzu's day after Mei has left. Yuzu tries to act as if everything's fine as she goes through an average day running into all her friends. But all her friends can see Yuzu is barely holding it together. It ends with Yuzu crying in what was once Mei in her room, alone without any of Mei's belongings. Coupled with Saburo Uta's knack for visual storytelling and facial expressions, it's one of the most soul-crushing reads I've ever endured because even without dialogue, you can read every thought on every character's face and it's agonizing. In the same way her friends can read Yuzu like a book, we can see all the pain in everyone's hearts clear as day. It might be the single best chapter in the series. If you couldn't tell by this whole video, I found the themes of Citrus to be interesting. It was one of the first things to make me engage with the series beyond the dumpster fire melodrama. I think it was Yuzu's conflict between trying to be a good stepsister for Mei versus her desire to be Mei's lover that made me realize there was more to this series. From there, it was easy to see what Citrus was trying to say about abuse, institutionalization, deception, and coming of age. Even what I thought was initially the theme of familial versus romantic love evolved throughout the series into different forms of love. And my opinions of Citrus increased when I had a better understanding of the history of Yuri and its predecessors Class S and Proto-Yuri. These elements were already things I picked up on when watching and reading for the first time, but I didn't understand their significance then. While some might say that Class S has been properly done and dusted by the time Citrus came around, I'm not sure I agree. The anime might have been a little late to the party, but the manga started in 2012, and the two anime that had some of the most damning critiques of Class S, Yurikuma Arashi and Flip Flappers, wouldn't air until 2015 and 2016 respectively. Likewise, two of the most popular Neo Class S series, Sweet Blue Flowers and Whispered Words, ended publication in 2013 and 2011 respectively, and both had 2009 anime adaptations. And the Neo Class S series Maria Watches Over Us didn't finish publishing until 2012, and its anime adaptation ended in 2009. If anything, I'd say the last nail in Class S's coffin will be when Yuri Is My Job finishes publishing. Kase-san was probably the first Yuri manga of this post-Neo Class S era. God, that's a lot of dashes. But Citrus was also one of the first of this new era. If there's a sort of singular example of why I like Citrus at the end of the day despite it all, I'd say it's that I want to see Mei and Yuzu happy. I've repeatedly said that I do not like incest pairings, not even if they aren't blood related. It's an immediate turnoff. I'm not gonna root for siblings or what have you to get together, so to Citrus's credit, I do want to see Mei and Yuzu happy together, and it's a lot of things that undo my natural resistance to the idea. First, again, it's done as tastefully as possible. Second, it ties into the themes and messages of the series. Next, it doesn't feel like it's trying to appeal to cis-cons, even if it will anyway, but they were gonna be on board, tasteful or not. Finally, I just like the characters of Mei and Yuzu. Citrus convinced me. But just Mei and Yuzu, no one else. They are exceptions. I ain't having people use this video as proof Citrus is pro-incest propaganda. Okay, in this section we're going to take a step back from Citrus and talk about problematic media as a whole, so bear with me. As consumers, we want things to be easy in media, as we do in real life. We want things to be quickly identifiable as righteous and evil, good and bad, correct and wrong. People and the things they create aren't like that, however. Opinions, tastes, experience, etc. all paint how we experience art, entertainment, and media. I'm reminded of a section of Plato's dialogue, The Symposium. In one section, Socrates recounts a conversation he had with another philosopher, Diotima, about the nature of Eros, the Greek deity of love. Socrates states he thinks that if Eros desires beauty, then he must be ugly, since why desire something you already have? Diotima disagrees, stating, do you really think that? If a thing is not beautiful, it has to be ugly, and if a thing is not wise, it has to be ignorant? Or haven't you found out yet there's something in between wisdom and ignorance? It's judging things correctly without being able to give a reason. Surely you see that this is not the same thing as knowledge, for how could knowledge be unreasoning? And it's not ignorance either, for how could what hits the truth be ignorance? Correct judgment, of course, has this character. It is in between understanding and ignorance. Then don't force whatever is not beautiful to be ugly, or whatever is not good to be bad. It's the same thing with love. When you agree he is neither good nor beautiful, you need not think he is ugly and bad. He could be something in between. Like Socrates, we are forcing things we do not like or things we do not perceive as perfect into being bad or problematic, when life and experiences are not binary. Something can be good and problematic, while something can be bad and unproblematic, just as much as the bad problematic and good unproblematic. When we label and force art into just two boxes, we are throwing the baby out with the bathwater if we deem it bad, not to our tastes, imperfect, or problematic, and force it into a box labeled not good. We deny ourselves reflection, understanding, knowledge, and experimentation by keeping to this binary and refusing to go beyond it, or engage with things that contradict it. It might seem like we have created two boxes, but in reality we've created one box and put ourselves inside of it, shooing away anything that might require us to leave it. Speaking of Greek philosophy, Aristotle believed in an ethical theory called virtue ethics. In virtue ethics, virtue lived between two vices, its lack and its overabundance. The textbook example is courage. It exists between cowardice and recklessness. The key feature of virtue ethics, however, is that it exists on a spectrum, as the right amount of courage, for example, is different in every scenario. There isn't a single correct amount, instead multitudes. The amount of courage needed to kill a bug in your apartment is different than if you're trying to fight those filthy no-good Spartans. I'm bringing this up because Aristotle believed you couldn't learn virtue simply by reading or writing about it. You could only gain it through experience. Only by having too much or too little virtue in your daily life, learning through your failures and successes, and engaging with the world could you understand virtue as a spectrum. And I think this is a good way to understand and critique art, entertainment, and media. We cannot simply force what is not good to be bad and not bad to be good. Nor can we truly understand art without engaging with it, whether it between good and bad, between sanitized and offensive, between well-aged and poorly aged. It's not something you can understand by writing something off as old or problematic or bad. I think choosing not to engage with anything that isn't perfect, good, or sanitized is a bad rule. Sorry for this tangent within a tangent, but I'm reminded of something I dislike about retro video game criticism. Often, reviews and retrospectives go over the importance, impact, influence, and pros and cons of a game, whether it be Metroid on the NES or Halo on the original Xbox, before ending that the game, quote, hasn't aged well, as though it's a critical trump card. And usually they never go beyond a game hasn't aged well. It's the last metaphorical nail in the coffin, the be-all end-all of game criticism. The line that once crossed can never be backtracked. I've always hated this. Not aging well isn't an all-encompassing aspect, nor is it a binary switch in which either something hasn't aged well and it's bad, and it has aged well and it's good. There are bad experiences that age well and are still as bad as the day they were conceived. Aging well is one aspect of gaming, and it's a spectrum. Yes, maybe the graphics for an N64 or PlayStation 1 game, trying to be realistic, haven't aged well, but the game can still be fun, the story can still be good, the music can still be bumpin'. Likewise, a thing with poorly aged elements can still be enjoyed. Yeah, the camera in Super Mario 64 isn't as good as most third-person cameras nowadays, but like all art, we meet things halfway when engaging with it. Whether it's old, foreign, not intended for us, not our usual genre, etc., etc. I'm reminded of this criticism when I hear people talking about pieces of media being problematic. Problematic is the not aging well of media criticism. I think problematic was a useful term, but instead of inviting critique and engagement, it takes its place. Problematic has become monolithic and binary. Something either is or isn't problematic. If it is, all problematic things are treated as the same level of problematic. Birth of a Nation and Call Me By Your Name are both problematic. Fundamentally, calling something problematic is lazy. It feigns caring while being careless, because if one truly did care enough to engage with the work, it wouldn't go beyond a single broad, open to interpretation statement. Instead, we would say, for example, it demonizes abortion, unquestionably promotes eugenics, calls for racial hierarchy, etc., etc. Problematic itself is a relative term. What is problematic to a white, cishet, fundamentalist Christian father born in the American South is going to be different than someone with blue hair and pronouns living in Portland. Ultimately, consuming pure or the quote correct media isn't radical. Video essayist FD Signifier goes further into this than I do in his excellent video, Leftist Infighting Almost Killed Me, (broke bread), where he talks specifically about leftist YouTube and the algorithm. But in short, just because you choose to only consume media you deem morally correct or pure, doesn't mean you're truly fighting for something bigger. Anime, manga, and YouTube, as with most entertainment, are part of the culture industry.
All of YouTube and most entertainment is a part of the culture industry. Frankfurt School philosophers Theodor Adorno and Mark Horkheimer coined the term the culture industry to describe broadly the way that our entertainment is designed to work in tandem with oppressive systems to reify capitalism, support personal alienation, and in general keep radical and social change from being possible. We see the culture industry in all of our entertainment, from our movies to our music, TV, etc.
The culture industry is in all of capitalist entertainment: film, music, TV shows, video games, and yes, anime and manga. One of the most successful ways the culture industry maintains hegemony is by convincing us that by consuming the correct media, we are being subversive and pursuing social and political change. But we aren't. Instead, the culture industry, and our consumer culture, has made those likely to attempt social and political change to become invested more in consuming capitalist entertainment and basing their identity on what they consume. This is not to say all art, entertainment, and media are worthless and we should throw them all away. Art, entertainment, and media are useful outside of being bastions for social and political change. They provide us comfort, even for those who partake in political and social movements. They create communities. They can inspire people to learn, grow, heal, and partake in movements for social and political change. They provide historical perspectives and accounts. They make it easier to understand and empathize with others through our shared commonalities as a single species. Speaking as a writer, I find art, entertainment, and media to be important for helping us imagine a future. Because if we cannot imagine a future, we fail to have one.
But then you have to remember that all of these people are not revolutionaries. They're creatives. They're just regular people.
The people behind even the most radical and transgressive art, entertainment, and media are creatives, not revolutionaries. They're normal folk like you and me. Marx wrote, "The writer may very well serve a movement of history as its mouthpiece, but he cannot of course create it." A belief that you can create social change by solely being a consumer is a praxis dead end. We've seen how going woke has made some go broke and some get rich. We see how brands can benefit from the controversy coming from either the right or left. All it shows how capitalism is not moral or immoral, but amoral. As long as capital is being made, it couldn't care less if it aligns with liberals or conservatives, authoritarians or libertarians, the woke mob or the bootlickers. If you take this to mean being a cautious consumer is inherently pointless and we should just consume with reckless abandon, remember what I was saying earlier. Just because something isn't the be-all end-all doesn't mean it's the exact opposite. Voting with your wallet, being a mindful consumer, and trying your best to avoid cruelty are important aspects of trying for a better world. But they're simply aspects. It's all harm reduction, and harm reduction without social or political change is a losing game, because when we don't have a movement fighting for our betterment, harm reduction will always result in losses. After all, it's always a compromise between the most harm and the least harm. Harm reduction doesn't create change, it slows our regression to barbarism. And social and political movements need harm reduction just as much as harm reduction needs social and political movements. Because harm reduction is what makes sure the ones fighting and the ones most vulnerable receive care and a means of subsistence during times of upheaval and struggle. To use an analogy, harm reduction and political movements are like marginalized community representation in media and legal protections for said communities, respectively. Both are necessary, as the lack of one aspect hurts the other. In a place like Japan, for example, even though we have genres such as Yuri and BL, and they're pretty visible in Japan, rights for queer folk in Japan are noticeably weaker than in the United States. Just because something is represented in media doesn't equate to political or social acceptance, protection, or benefits. But in the United States, while queer folk, generally speaking, because we're in a regressive part of history regarding this now, have more political rights, protections, and benefits than Japan, we still have to fight tooth and nail for queer representation in our popular media. We need both. And the same is true of harm reduction and social movements. They are best together, and the reason people are cynical of harm reduction being overemphasized in the United States elections, politics, or even media isn't because it doesn't matter, it's because it can't matter without solidarity with broader social and political change. Harm reduction is as it says on the tin. It reduces harm. It doesn't stop it, and it doesn't resolve it. It's at best a defensive measure. Anyway, my point that got lost along the way while I tried to show off I minored in political science as an undergrad is that only engaging with media you deem morally and ethically correct for social justice is both impossible and counterintuitive. Just because you choose not to read the lesbian stepsister manga doesn't mean you're some savior of the lesbian identity. It means you chose not to give some corporation your time and money and instead gave it to another, more pleasing to your personal tastes corporation. Yet at the same time, it's not pointless. Some good can be done and some harm can be reduced. But acting as if not engaging with any problematic or controversial media makes you a revolutionary is like saying you single-handedly beat the beef industry by never eating at Burger King. Not all problematic things are equal. You do more damage by funding J.K. Rowling, who uses her money to fund transphobic campaigns, as well as says those who pay for her products support her positions, more than reading or even paying for the stepsister Yuri that's about as niche to the general public as any other comic that hasn't been made into a Marvel or DC film or TV show. Even just discussing the manga space, there's a reason people are choosing not to watch the new Rurouni Kenshin anime, because its creator Nobuhiro Watsuki was found with over 100 DVDs and CDs of child porn. Worse, he received a slap on the wrist from authorities, only having to pay the equivalent of $1,900. My student loans were more than that. I'm not saying media entertainment on its own can't do damage. I'd never defend a Colleen Hoover book, for example. I just think it's insular thinking to treat all problematic media as equal, that consumption is the be-all end-all of ethics, activism, or morality, and that people are somehow better for not consuming anything deemed by the mob as not pure, correct, or good. I'd rather talk to someone who's read The Sun Also Rises and can balance their criticisms of its anti-Semitism and misogyny with analysis of its depictions of ennui, sex, and masculinity, because that shows they're able to identify issues like anti-Semitism and misogyny and how it intertwines with other aspects in a work of media. Not that I think we should forgive or gloss over anti-Semitism and misogyny, my point is the opposite. We have to be willing to confront it and talk about it when it does show up. And again, I have to stress this because I know some of y'all will be at my door otherwise, you're allowed to not engage with everything. Side note, I also think there's a difference between critiquing old and contemporary works. When critiquing Hemingway or Baldwin or Plath, they aren't just art or media, they are also history, so part of the value of a work of art is how it captures the ideas and attitudes of the time it was made. I'm not saying this to justify misogyny or racism in a work, rather it shows how such things were justified, woven into everyday society, and how it was settled within the foundation. Also, many of these authors are dead, so you're not financially backing them. The reason people have less of a problem buying H.P. Lovecraft than J.K. Rowling despite the racism and anti-Semitism is H.P. Lovecraft isn't making any money to donate to the KKK or Westboro Baptist Church or whatever. He's dead. There's a material difference between buying H.P. Lovecraft and J.K. Rowling, and that's what matters, not some idealist moral reason. And the historical aspect of art is important because history, especially the history we lived, can be so easily forgotten. I've had younger people, especially young queers, absolutely shocked to learn that calling someone gay as an insult in the 90s or 2000s was not just super common, but also devastating. Like, people would fight in schools over that, and that's not even getting into how often the R slur was thrown around so casually, but I digress. Coming back to Citrus, what is its legacy? The original series ended in 2018, but Comic Yorihime publishes the sequel series Citrus Plus. Citrus Plus's 6th volume is preparing for release in Japan at time of this video. Although Citrus isn't the new hotness on everyone's lips, it's remained relevant with the Yuri fandom and even the broader anime space. Mei and Yuzu have left their mark on the community, and it's not uncommon to see fan works of them online similar to other venerable but dated Yuri couples, such as Adachi and Shimomura, Kase and Yamada, and Toko and Yu. Like Adachi and Shimomura, Bloom Into You, and Kase-san, Citrus was a big part of Yuri's popularity surge in the early to mid-2010s. This surge caused the diversification of the genre in the late 2010s, and the rise of genre Yuri, such as Isekai Yuri, Fantasy Yuri, Sci-Fi Yuri, and Shikaijin Yuri. Before, when Yuri was young and mainly centered on schoolgirl relationships, these stories were simply novelties. They'd be called Yuri with fantasy elements, or Yuri about adults. There wasn't enough Yuri to have subgenres. The mid-2010s were the beginning of this shift from quantity to quality, the moment when hay becomes a haystack, so to speak. In Citrus, the manga and the anime helped people become fans and creators of Yuri. Many Yuri creators have shown to be fans of Citrus and co-signed Sabaru Uta as a creator. NTR, I Married My Best Friend to Shut Up My Parents, and Days of Love at Seagull Villa mangaka Kodama Naoko's the most famous example. Other examples include About a College Girl Who Gets Picked Up at a Mixer by an older girl mangaka Yukio Yuki, both the Kuma no Riddle artist and writer Sunao Miyamada and Yun Koga, respectively, Amiro Kochaka Kadan mangaka Miyabi Fujieda, Arito artist Kyako, Beauty and the Beast Girl mangaka Neji, Chasing After Aoi Koshiba artist Fly, Donuts Under a Crescent Moon mangaka Usue Shio, Hello My Melancholic mangaka Yaoi Usawa, If I Could Reach You mangaka TMNR, Kitanai Kimi ga Ichiban Kawaii mangaka Manio, Kyokano mangaka Kyoko Iwami, Lonely Girl ni Sakarene mangaka Kashikazi, Scarlet mangaka Chiri Yuino, The Summer You Were There mangaka Yuama, Wataton mangaka Nanatsu Mukunoki, Whisper Me a Love Song mangaka and There's No no freaking way I'll be your lover unless artist Iku Takishima, Yuri mangaka Namori, and Yuri is my job mangaka Mimin. Sabaruta even provided an ending illustration for the anime adaptation of Yuri is my job, coincidentally done by the same studio that adapted Citrus. 2018 was a watershed year for Yuri. It gave us TV anime of Citrus, Bloom Into You, and Happy Sugar Life, and an hour-long OVA for Kase-san and Morning Glories. We received an adaptation of the Yuri slice of life comedy series Miss Vampire Lives in My Neighborhood, the Yuri Light and Personal Anime of the Year winner Review Starlight premiered, and the art house Yuri masterpiece Flip Flappers finally got an English dub, 2 years after its airing. 2018 was also the start of many Yuri manga, including Chasing After Aoi Koshiba, Goodbye My Rose Garden, How Do We Relationship, Our Teachers Are Dating, Run Away With Me Girl, Still Sick, Super Women in Love, and A Witch's Love at the End of the World, to name a few. 2023 has become the biggest year for Yuri since 2018. We had 5 Yuri adaptations premiere: Stardust Telepath, I'm in Love with the Villainess, The Magical Revolution of the Reincarnated Princess and the Genius Young Lady, The Vexation of a Shut-in Vampire Princess, and Yuri is My Job. Birdie Wing, Golf Girl's Story, and Mobile Suit Gundam, The Witch from Mercury both continued in 2023. In the indie Yuri film Valicia of Pluto, Vapor Trail Another Age 2006 premiered. These are all big names. The manga and light novels for I'm in Love with the Villainess have been a Yuri critics' critical darling since their debut. Yuri is My Job is one of the most popular Yuri manga out right now, and The Magical Revolution of the Reincarnated Princess and the Genius Young Lady, and The Vexation of a Shut-in Vampire Princess are both popular light novel series. While many Yuri-like and Yuri Light series have aired throughout the years, we've been usually getting only one Yuri adaptation a year. The Executioner and Our Way of Life in 2022, Other Side Picnic in 2021, Adachi and Shimomura in 2020, and so on. I wanted to say something profound like Citrus's history is the history of Yuri, but I realized that's the dumbest thing I've ever heard. Of course its history is in line with the genre and cultural context it was created. That's how that works! The reason I chose Citrus as this video's topic is, despite having better contemporaries, talking about Citrus is far more fun and interesting. But it's not just that. There's plenty of interesting Yuri out there, but Citrus's combination of being a dumpster fire and sincere queer love story is what endears it to me. It's messy and dumb and brilliant and melodramatic and queer and tropey and subversive and problematic and beautiful and ugly and sincere and trashy, and there isn't anything else like it. It fails so spectacularly, yet passes with flying colors. It's the Schrodinger's cat of Yuri. It's the Evangelion of Yuri. Citrus celebrated its 10th anniversary in 2022, which is pretty momentous for any form of pop culture, but especially Yuri, where most seem to end in 2, 3, or 5 volumes tops, usually over 2 years. But Citrus has endured for 10 years, with 15 volumes and counting if you add up both Citrus and Citrus Plus. Should you read Citrus? I don't know. It's not the best Yuri or anything. I could think of 30 other series that are better. Here's my giant list of Yuri and queer manga recommendations. At the end of the day, my opinion on Citrus mirrors that of Bauman over Friedman. As Bauman writes, it is the reason that we can look at the same work, Citrus, and I can say, here are some problematic elements, but it has a lot of great stuff and some queer elements. Whereas they, Friedman, say, this is unrealistic and unacceptable. Note that I believe both our interpretations and methods are valuable and valid. After all that, all I have to add is this.
Citrus, May, or Yuzu ever was this. But I'm talking about Citrus Plus, which will be the new chapter that is released by Twitter. Which is something people I don't want to reach out and hear anyone.